I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Ehrlich.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
Unfrosted.
But the
and,
radical
like,
thinker who said, no, Kellogg, we're taking off the frosting from the...
I mean, come on. The frosted Pop-Tarts are the superior ones.
It's the only way to go. Anybody that says otherwise needs to go home.
They're sad. They're sad people.
If you're having a Pop-Tart, quit, like...
Don't make it
What
diet.
are we doing? Right, like, it's not good for you even without the frosting. So, like, have some frosting on there.
Just might as well have some frosting.
This is crazy.
And by the way, my favorite Pop-Tart is the cherry Pop-Tarts with because the sprinkles on the cherry is like the super sugar crystal crunchy. I feel like the strawberry is not as good, although brown sugar's all right.
I would also say, I think probably with you because the cherry one has the most tartness to it.
Which is funny because I don't really like tart very much.
But it's already so sweet that it balances it out.
I think that's it. Because I usually prefer cherry to like raspberry. Raspberry's like, it's like super zingy to me.
See, I'm weird. I generally am just not a cherry person at all, except for cherry Coke. Anytime that I see it, it is an automatic.
Like,
and then
must have cherry Coke.
Ask Kat. Anytime you go to one of those like make your own soda machines, I'm always like, ooh, cherry Coke. And like I can make it and I get really happy because I love cherry Coke so much. But that's the only other time is that and the Pop-Tarts. But beyond that, I'm like cherry pie, all that kind of stuff, not as much into it.
So I guess maybe I need to revise my statement. For me, it's all like, if I'm going to have a Jolly Rancher, cherry. Tootsie Roll Pop, cherry. Dum Dum, cherry. But strawberry is like weak. But if you say, let me give you a piece of cheesecake with sauce on top, I want strawberry versus cherry. So I don't know. I'm confused.
See, and then
I like artificial cherry, but real strawberry.
That's how I am with, I'm one of the strangest humans out there because everybody gives me crap about this. I love artificial grape flavor. See?
Except for jelly. I like artificial grape jelly.
People do the same thing, but Kat and I are on the same page. We think that grape is the best artificial flavor. So like lollipops, Jolly Ranchers, we go for grape. But in all other contexts, I'm like, nah. Like, look, I like grapes on their own, sure, whatever. But like, yeah, there's not
real
like
grapes and artificial grape are so different.
They're so
from
different.
Each other.
They're completely
because I'll eat
apart.
green grapes. Red grapes are okay too, but like
I like green grapes better too.
I like green grapes with the seed. Actually, the first time I liked grapes, I never liked grapes growing up. The first time I liked grapes was when I went to study abroad in Spain and I ate real grapes.
I have heard that this is how it is in Japan.
Oh, yeah?
That, like, it's not even just that, like, they have great grapes, but apparently in Japan, grapes are, like, a big deal.
Oh, I'll have to ask Aaron about this.
If they give you grapes, it's like, oh, whoa, you have grapes, and you're eating grapes. I said grape too many times now, and I've got the semantic satiation going on.
Grape. Well, cool. I don't know. At some point, you can drop into that, I guess. Should we get started?
Yeah.
Maybe cut out the part about when Michael Jordan's looking at the shoe for the first time. That was a little...
Well, I mean, whatever.
Now you have to cut that part out. No, I don't know.
I'm cutting out. I'm good.
All right. Cool. Should we get started?
Well, I think we should probably introduce the show first.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. Like, are we going to get started? Shall we get started?
Yeah.
I will get started. Welcome to the Biographers.
Yay! Hello, everyone.
I'm your host, Aubrey, along with the other host.
Good old Daniel Newman. I like first last name. I'm going to say Daniel Newman.
I know, but you know that... keep saying on Apple Podcast it says McCarthy. Like my name's wrong.
I can change that, though.
My name's wrong in a number of places, and then I see it, and then I immediately ADD away from that, and then I forget about it till the next time, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I shouldn't change that. I think I changed it on our website, but I don't.
I can change it on our thing. I forgot.
Yeah,
it's just through our little hosting thing.
Whatever. It's still part of my name.
Yeah,
it's still my heritage.
It's true.
Go McCarthys.
I like it. I think it's a cool last name.
I mean. Yeah,
Aubrey McCarthy rolls off the tongue, I'll be honest, more than Aubrey Hicks does. But it's also because I've said it for a long time, so maybe that's part of it.
I've always felt like it's a lot of syllables. Like, it kind of, like I have mothballs in my mouth, like Aubrey McCarthy, like too much. Yeah. But, yeah, it's
fun to say.
It's fine.
It's like my sister-in-law is Aubrey Newman.
Aubrey Newman. Oh, speaking of
good.
Aubrey's, we had to call U-Haul yesterday to ask them if we could get propane when our power was out, but then we didn't end up needing to get it, or natural gas, whatever, propane, yeah. But the person I spoke to was named Aubrey. And I was like, "Hi, U-Haul Aubrey. Do you know what your name means?" And she said, "Nope." I said, "It means King of the Elves."
I was going to say in my head, I was like, they said King of the Elves.
Yes, but it's funny. Every time I meat an Aubrey or someone who knows an Aubrey and mentions, "Oh, my so-and-so's named Aubrey," I say, "Do you know that it means King of the Elves?" And they're like, "No." And it's kind of baffled. What does Daniel mean?
I don't know that it means anything specific. I just knew that it was
Just
the
like
Bible
Bible
of the
character.
Daniel, or
Yeah.
the Bible of the Daniel,
The
Daniel
Bible
of the Bible. Daniel the lion's dead, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace.
Daniel in the lion's den, not lion's dead.
Lion's den, correct. I can't remember if Daniel kills the lion or not. It's
I was
been
in that
a long
play
time.
in church choir, so I don't remember too. I was also in
do a play of that?
Jonah. Oh, Jonah. The Lord wants you to go
Have you watched?
to the land of shame and woe.
Wow, you know too much of that. I've never even heard that before.
It's from Jonah and the Amazing. Wait, that's Joseph.
That's Joseph. and the Amazing
Jonah.
Technicolor
There was a
Dreamcoat.
Jonah play that I was in church.
We will move on very briefly. I will say, do you watch Good Omens on Amazon Prime?
I've seen. Oh man. No.
We started watching the second season of it recently, and they go over the story of Job. And if you don't know the story of Job, it's a very funny thing that they do with the show, which is basically Job is just this loyal servant of God, and God does a bet with Satan of like, Job is the best. He's the best. Everybody loves him. And Satan's like, "I'll bet you I can crack him." And God's like, "I bet you can't." And that's in the Bible. That's true. And so basically Job just gets wrecked. His family dies. His crops die. His animals die. His body is covered in boils. And the whole time Job is just like, "What did I do?" Literally nothing.
It's so funny. This is not a spoiler, but later in this episode, we're going to talk about Abigail's servant Job, who's so
Oh my
nice.
gosh.
Who's so nice.
Awesome. Now I'm very curious.
Okay, so it was on point. All right. Well, let's pick back up in the summer of 1776. That here is like pretty familiar in my mind.
Summer of 76.
Well, not that 76. That's the yes, but yes,
Those were
1776.
the best days of my life.
Oh, well, this was 1776. Probably not the best days of many people's lives.
True.
It was a year after the first battle of the American Revolution and shortly before the Declaration of Independence. In 1776, Abigail was 32. I feel like I haven't talked about how old she was
No, yeah, good call.
as we go through time, like I maybe did with Victoria so much. We're going to go from when Abigail was 32 to when she's 40 in this episode. So we're going to cover
okay.
most of a decade. Sadly, Abigail's mother had died only a few months earlier in the dysentery epidemic, if we recall. That's right. And Abigail had recently penned her famous Remember the Ladies letter to her husband, John. So we're going to introduce a new person to this series that we haven't talked about before. Abigail's brother, William, and he was born 2 years before her in 1746. So I was reading my biography dutifully, and for those at home, I'm not great at reading ahead and being like super in the future on my books, but actually I am a little bit right now. But we come across William the brother, and we've talked about the three daughters, and there was a earlier part in my biography that was like, this is what Reverend the Parson Smith said at all of the weddings of all of his daughters, and like never once was Brother William mentioned.
Weird.
So he comes up, and I'm like, she had a brother? On her Wikipedia page, it says she was one of three daughters, and then like way further down, they mention this brother, this black sheep brother.
Now I feel bad for William, the long lost
I don't know
brother.
if we're gonna feel that bad for him.
Okay.
I mean, he's not like
Bad.
he's not like evil, but he's kind of a deadbeat.
Okay.
Does that make
Tell me more.
Okay, so let's see. I kind of ad-libbed what I was going to read. Okay, so not much information survives about him. He was a military man for a period of time. In 1771, he married a woman named Catherine Louisa Salmon, like that. They had three daughters. And he briefly served as captain of the Lincoln, Massachusetts Minutemen. That group actually fought at Concord in the beginning of the war. But After that, he kind of devolved into a bit of a deadbeat. He was unable to care for his family, and later his children ended up going to live with all of his sisters. So, like, they didn't stay with him and his wife. Abigail and John took in Louisa Jr. in 1778, and she was a toddler at the time. I also just wanted to point out, with Victoria, she named her daughter after herself. Abigail named her daughter after herself. Louisa Salmon named her daughter after herself. And then it gets funny because, like, multiple people are named, like, Susanna after John's mother. There's just so many
repeated names.
You get a lot of, like, juniors in the male, but not in the female. And it's just kind of funny to me.
Do they even get, like, the second?
No, I think they're just called, they don't even get like a suffix on their name. I think they're just called the same name. And then, like, Abigail's daughter, Abigail, is really Nabby.
Right.
And Victoria's daughter was Pussy.
I mean, look, it's silly either way. I've always personally felt like the whole, gotta name my son after me is always like, well, you like yourself a whole lot, don't you?
Well, so, like, I think it had to do with, like, making sure that the property stayed in the family name, and in business you were aware that this was someone related to this other person. Like, it was almost practical at the time, but with the women, not so much. I just think it's funny because we don't see it these days. So it's probably just something that was extremely normal culturally then, and now is much less so. But I mean, my grandfather was William Marcus, went by Bill. My dad, William Marcus, goes by Mark. My brother, William Marcus, goes by Bill. But our grandfather passed away before I was even born. Yeah. So it's like, when we talk about Bill, we know we're talking about my brother. Sure. So it's just kind of funny. Like, I don't know. It's just different.
Yeah, I don't care enough to fight anybody on it. I just thought it was funny. I'm always like, boy.
I'm just being weird, like, pointing out so much that, like, Louisa Jr., like, you just think of Junior as a boy.
I've also known people that have, like, named their kid the fourth or whatever.
Yeah. No, it keeps
out of
going.
guilt, because they're like, I don't want to break this. Like, I'm now the third, and I feel bad if I didn't name my kid the fourth. Like, it's like, okay, I have to now. And it's
32nd.
Like, that kind of is a bummer to me, but anyway.
Well, no one named anybody William Jr. or William the Millionth or anything. His namesake wasn't one to carry on. Despite the fact that he was a bit of a bad apple, families often try to take care of each other. And in 1776, Abigail made an attempt to get her brother a position in the Continental Army using John's connections as an officer. He'd obviously been in the military, and then he was, like, out. I don't know if, like, his term, like, was up or something, but she wrote to a bunch of congressmen that, like, whose jobs it was to recommend people for officership. John was like, don't get your hopes up. But he said, go ahead and enlist again as a common soldier. That might help your chances. And William just ignored him. He didn't want to do that. He just wanted to be an officer. He didn't want to be just a regular old soldier. So he didn't get a position as an officer. And we'll learn a little more about him later on in the episode.
Okay.
Let's see. So we haven't talked yet about this. John and Abigail were really frugal. They believed in being thrifty, foregoing a lot of luxuries that others sought out. This was a good practice for Abigail. She'd begun as abstaining from tea, like, in alignment with her fellow patriots when they were like, no tea. And she was so frugal. She's like, this is fine. I'm going to be okay. She would write about denouncing drinking tea in letters. Oh, this is so bad. But in June of 1776, she wrote John a letter and said that she wanted some tea. She said, I only wish for it as a medicine, as a relief to a nervous pain in my head to which I am sometimes subject. So she was like, no tea for anybody except just, like, can I have a little tea?
I just need it for, like, my head. You don't understand. Like, I get a headache sometimes.
I get headaches.
And it's sort of like when I learned that during Prohibition in America, doctors could prescribe whiskey.
I did not know that.
Which is hilarious to think about, and it was for this exact reason. And so it was like, oh, I've got back pain, I get headaches, and they'd be like, oh, well, then we'll get you a prescription for whiskey.
Okay, well,
that was like how it was with medical marijuana for forever.
I mean, that's like the way it is with a
lot of states still to this day. So anyway,
that's pretty funny. Okay, well, so Abigail might have written sooner with her tea request if she had known what was about to come her way, because she was going to have some headaches in the next couple months.
Uh-oh.
In June of 76, there was a smallpox outbreak. The British had sailed out of Boston recently. They eventually, like in the war, moved further south. And so like less stuff happened up in that area. So many Bostonians that had left had returned from the countryside. And when there's a lot of people congested together in a town, diseases spread. Abigail's astute suspicion was that the paper currency printed by the government to fund the war was spreading the disease everywhere. And she might have been right. Like they're handing over paper money and it was like living on that paper money.
Sure. There's a big lack of Purell back in those days.
Well, yeah. And then like you read that stuff about like if you test a bill, you're going to find like cocaine and fecal matter and like nasty stuff on it.
Money is filthy.
Money is filthy.
In many ways.
So many ways. Dirty money.
Dirty money.
Anyway, luckily, if you remember from our first Abigail episode, smallpox was preventable through inoculation. More recently, though, inoculation had been prohibited in most colonies due to the risk because it was putting a live virus in people's bodies. But given the state of the epidemic, the legislature changed its tune. They decided to do a mass inoculation inside of Boston, not just in the hospitals, but like anybody anywhere in Boston could be inoculated. And since everyone was being inoculated, say that 15 times fast like I'm about to. Since everyone was being inoculated, no one had to quarantine except for the people who chose not to be inoculated. So if they didn't want to do it, or they hadn't already had smallpox, or they hadn't previously been inoculated, those people were like, you got to stay inside because everyone's going to be walking around with smallpox.
Whoa.
So it's
crazy.
It was like a reverse quarantine kind of.
It's like reverse COVID.
Yeah, it's kind of wild.
Funny.
So Abigail had wanted to be I keep saying inoculated because they never did clarify if a vaccination and inoculation are the same thing, but they basically are the same thing. She'd wanted to get it when John had like 10 years before, but her parents had said no. But her mother's now passed away. She's a woman. She's older. She decided to make the decision to do it. And she decided to do this for all of her children, her sisters, nieces, nephews. To quote another founding father, Benjamin Franklin, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Let me take that again. To quote another founding father, Benjamin Franklin, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So it was worth it.
I've never heard that before.
You've never heard that? Oh, I love that. Oh, it's one of my it's kind of like proper preparation prevents piss poor performance.
Yeah, it's like an evolved version of the what is it?
Yeah.
An ounce of
prevention is worth a pound of cure.
I was thinking preparation. An ounce of preparation is worth a pound of something else. But I think we could retool that. Anyway, keep going.
A pound of having to redo your job over and over again because you didn't do it right the first time.
An ounce of preparation is worth a pound of procrastination. Maybe?
I don't know.
Oh, okay, we'll move on.
I like it. I'm surprised you didn't know that. I love that saying. So, luckily, wealthy Uncle Isaac Smith Sr., so remember she had a falling out with her cousin Isaac Smith, but her uncle Isaac, his father, he was a merchant in Boston. He had a big mansion, and he said, everyone come on in, stay at my house for your inoculation. So I kind of am like, oh, it was like an inoculation spa for everybody.
Inoculation sleepover.
Yes. More than a dozen family members stayed there, which included Abigail, Nabby, John Quincy, Charles, young Tommy, as well as her older sister, Mary Cranch, their children, Mary and Cranch, their children, Betsy. It was like everybody was there. Although they didn't mention if her father was there. So I'm wondering
he's
if
still around.
Yeah, he's still around. And actually he was like doing pretty great. I wonder if
he got better because he was really
sad, but he started getting better.
Passed.
Yeah,
Okay,
he started feeling better after a while. Anyway, everybody left for Boston on July 12th, and Abigail figured that they would all be home in a month because for John it took a month, right? So that's right. It's just going to take a month.
Right.
And you might notice that date, July 12th. We're talking about 1776. That's after July 4th, which is an important date in history, but we'll get to that in a minute. So they arrived in Boston and they started the process with the incision and the insertion of the pox-laden string just a few minutes hours after arriving. They didn't have to do the 10 days of prep work that John and his brother had done with all the ipecac and the comical vomiting. They didn't have to do any of that. But I think no meat was still a thing at this point. all of that, the pre-vomiting, I guess we could say,
The purging.
the purge, had been deemed unnecessary medically. Abigail wrote to John that all the kids, even Nabby, quote, stood the operation manfully.
Manfully, okay.
Yeah, nobody
that makes sense,
cried.
yeah.
Nobody cried. Even though they were not prescribed that preparatory Ipecac, the doctor did prescribe medication that made all the kids, quote, puke every morning. Those were her actual words, which sound kind of modest. Abigail hadn't yet received her tea from John, and she made sure to mention her lack of tea in her next letter, saying, quote, a little India herb would have been mighty agreeable now.
Ooh, a little something to take the edge off.
6 days later, on July 18th, Abigail went down to King Street outside the Massachusetts State House because you didn't have to quarantine. The whole town was out and about. She listened to the Declaration of Independence being read to the crowd.
Oh, cool.
I know. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't feel like we've had like as many like positive things, but like I remember where I was when 9/11 happened.
Sure.
I remember various things in my life, and this is one of those things. Super cool.
Yeah, dude.
Here's a letter to John describing the moment. I went with the multitude into King Street to hear the proclamation for independence read and proclaimed. Some field pieces with the train were brought there. The troops appeared under the arms, and all the inhabitants assembled there. The smallpox prevented many thousand from the country. When Colonel Crafts read from the balcony of the State House the proclamation, great attention was given to every word. As soon as he ended, the cry from the balcony was, God save our American states. And then 3 cheers, which rendered the air. The bells rang, the privateers fired, the forts and batteries, the cannon were discharged, the platoons followed, and every face appeared joyful. The king's arms were taken down from the State House and from every place in which it appeared and burnt in King Street.
Crazy.
Thus ends royal authority in the state, and all the people shall say Amen.
Dang.
So they rioted.
I can only imagine. Well,
In a good way.
It's a crazy thought that if you had been living your entire life when those types of things would be ended and they would say, God save the king. And they would all shout, God save the king. And now you're in this square that somebody says at the end of all this, and God save our United States.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, goosebump city for me. I'm like, come on, that is neat. Oh.
Well, and I'm like envisioning all these like troops like climbing up and taking down the flags and the coat of arms and burning them. And
it's probably a little silly, but I personally love the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson.
I haven't watched it in a long time.
I know Mel Gibson has a sordid past and everything, but it's
okay.
still
Let's
a good
just keep
movie.
him as an actor.
I'm just saying it's a good movie. And I do think back to before any of like the war stuff starts, there's a lot that's going on in Boston where they're just showing celebrations and you hear like music getting played and all this kind of stuff. And I just am thinking of a very similar scene and all the colonial garb and all the, them throwing like not even confetti. It'd have to be like rice up into the air and stuff, like whatever they had to chuck up. I don't know. It's just a cool scene to think about.
Was ticker tape made back then?
No, not yet.
I was going to say it was a little early. But yes, I mean, just, shouting, not
it's
huzzah,
just, yeah.
I guess, anymore.
Yeah, and probably people like shooting off guns.
Yes,
You hear like with these guns.
Well, and she said the cannons and things like that.
Yeah, it's so cool to think about.
So this part's really cool. She noted to John how she noticed that some of the portions she thought that John had personally written of the Declaration of Independence in a prior draft had been changed or taken out. It included a denunciation of slavery that had been in there at one point that was removed.
Oh, whoa.
But that's right. John sent Abigail a draft of the Declaration of Independence.
Jeez, that is awesome.
Handwritten by himself, and Abigail actually thought that because he had handwritten that draft, he had written the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
Now, to be clear, the first draft of the Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson. Yes. He was part of the Committee of Five, which is a group of 5 delegates that the Second Continental Congress nominated to write this important declaration. The committee included Adams himself, Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman, who I don't remember from my growing up.
Names.
I have some descriptions of what they were. They were delegates in the Continental Congress. They were just guys that they thought could do the job. John had suggested that Thomas Jefferson write the first draft, and then the rest of them, all 5 of them, would work together afterward to finalize the document.
That's why the first draft of the Declaration of Independence included life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, which is John Locke. And that's what Thomas Jefferson got it from.
Okay.
And it was Ben Franklin who went, no, it can't be property.
That's a little
It needs
rough.
to be more wishy-washy. And he said happiness sounded better. And to my knowledge, I could be wrong about this. I saw something years and years and years ago that showed that Benjamin Franklin was the final quill to paper writer of the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't like his words necessarily, but when it came to write the last draft that we're all going to look at, I read somewhere that was actually penned by Benjamin Franklin.
Okay. If we care, Roger Sherman, he was a representative from Connecticut, and he was the only person to sign all 4 of the U.S. state papers: the Continental Association, the Declaration, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution.
And that was Sherman, you said?
Roger Sherman.
Dang, I feel like this is a person that we should know more about. This is amazing.
I don't know, but yeah. I mean, it's kind of amazing we know who Ben Franklin is because he wasn't a president. It's kind of weird.
I don't even know how to describe him. I cannot think of a figure in modern day that I could even compare him to, because he was just so insanely important, but again, never an elected official. It's crazy.
Yeah, yes, he was actually technically he was in the
postmaster.
What you mean?
Yeah, like he wasn't like a senator. He wasn't a president. He wasn't a governor. He wasn't a state senator. He wasn't in the House of Representatives.
He also was an inventor, so maybe he was just busy doing that.
He was a thinker.
Yeah.
He was a writer. He was a thinker. He was a prominent voice of America. Ben Franklin was the one that created the "Don't Tread on Me" comic with the snake that's cut up into pieces. That was Ben Franklin who made that. So I think that it was sort of like a de facto. He just has to be a part of this stuff. He has such a tight pulse. But
back to the inoculation station. I like that.
That's nice.
The 12 Adamses were staying at Uncle Isaac's house in Boston, waiting for their pustules to appear.
Gross.
That was the sign that the virus had taken to their body.
Thanks for that image.
Abigail began to feel sick 11 days after her procedure, but the kids had no symptoms. Soon afterward, Nabby and John Quincy started feeling ill, and Abigail was relieved. But young Charles and Tommy, they had no symptoms 2.5 weeks later, on July 29th. They weren't the only ones, though. Many patients citywide had no symptoms. So the speculation was that the doctors took on just too many patients, and they weren't able to effectively inoculate them.
It's not possible that they were just asymptomatic?
So we're going to get into it a little bit more. It is definitely possible.
Possible, but probably not likely.
It was too high of a number.
Okay.
It was causing alarm in the public.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because one of the worst things that could happen is you think you're inoculated and you're not.
Right.
Which we'll get into a little bit in a second. In the end, Abigail demanded additional inoculations for Nabby, Tommy, and Charles. Even though Nabby had been symptomatic, Abigail was kind of worried because she was like, maybe she wasn't really sick. She just kind of felt a little under the weather.
Like she got a cold coincidentally or something?
Yeah. John Quincy had pustules and he was good to go. John Quincy is
oh, great.
He's the perfect child so far in what I've learned. He's we'll learn more about him soon, but he's obviously presidential material, and he could just get his inoculation to work really well so easily. He's just gifted.
He's a no problem kind of guy.
Yeah, no problem. But Nabby, even though she'd been feeling sick around the same time as Abigail, she had maybe a couple little but not really.
Okay.
So after her second inoculation, Nabby ended up with more than 1,000 pustules.
Oh.
Abigail was grossly relieved.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess.
John helpfully wrote suggesting methods to make sure that none of her marks scarred her. And he basically said, don't go in the sun with your pustules because you'll get them. They'll turn into scars all over your body.
Do we know if what happened with her scarring?
I think it was fine.
Okay, cool.
She didn't she wasn't maimed from this.
Okay,
he
cool.
was just telling her be sure you don't go out in the sun with those things. You're going to get scars. Now, Charles had never gotten the disease from the inoculation. He actually got it naturally. And I think Charles and Tommy ended up having 3 procedures before they like Charles finally got it naturally. Tommy had 3 procedures and got it through the inoculation. So it was way harder. And instead of 1 month, it took almost 2 months to get through this whole thing, which tea would have helped a little bit. But she'd still not received her tea from John. Or so she thought.
Ooh.
He'd actually sent it. But the courier, John's friend and colleague, Eldridge Jerry, had mistakenly delivered Abigail's tea to Samuel Adams' wife, Elizabeth. Ironically, Abigail went to visit Elizabeth and was served the tea that had been intended for her.
That is poetic irony.
And Abigail explained the situation, and Elizabeth was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and gave her the rest of the tea, but it was like less than half.
Well, okay, but that's still very sweet of Elizabeth to do.
It was very sweet of her, but like Abigail really could have used that tea during all this inoculation frustration.
For sure, but like, Elizabeth could have as easily been like,
Samuel sent this to me.
Yes, and it's here's you have a couple cups of tea on me, and like sent away with some of it, but was like, oh dude, that sucks, here's the rest of it. That's not bad. That's nice.
And then apparently John did send her some more tea, but it wasn't as nice. Like it wasn't as good of tea, and so
we're in the middle of the revolution.
Yeah, it was tough. So I'm not sure you noticed, I did enunciate it. Eldridge Jerry?
Sailor?
No.
He
is the guy that the term gerrymandering came from.
Oh.
Later, when he was governor of Massachusetts in 1812, he signed a bill that allowed for the reworking of election district lines for the benefit of the Democratic Republican Party. When he did this, the shape of the lines resembled a salamander, hence the term gerrymander.
Wow.
There was a political cartoon of this image that was published on March 26, 1812 in the Boston Gazette, and then it was reprinted later in other papers. We have a link to the gerrymander political cartoon in the sources on our website. But
cool, I want to see. It
was a bit of a fun squirreling. But again, this is like 36 years later, but I just was like, gerrymander?
That's pretty amazing. And very quickly, we'll say for any listeners that aren't familiar with gerrymandering, it's basically just a way of like reorganizing voting zones in states for generally, look,
no, it is absolutely malicious.
It's usually for manipulation reasons.
So this was for the benefit of the Democratic Republican Party.
Yeah. So like the way that it'll work is like if a district by 51% votes Republican, then it's worth X amount of points towards the Electoral College. So if you rezone in certain ways, you can basically middle out certain parties and then make it so that, actually this district voted 51%, whatever color you're on the side of, and then it boosts your numbers. So it's not a good thing. But
they'll
that's
use
what
it locally
is.
too, though. Like
yes.
it's not necessarily reserved to like presidential elections. It's everywhere,
and it still happens to this day.
Typically, it's got a racist tone too. So they will take out certain demographic groups by gerrymandering, and then have people win.
That makes sense.
So. Anyway, back to 1776. I know we were going to get through like 8 years, but we're still in 1776 right now. But then we'll pick up speed in a minute. It was no doubt an exciting year. After being gone for most of 1776, John returned to Braintree in November for some leave.
Nice.
After he arrived home, Abigail became pregnant pretty much immediately.
Shocker.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Something else grow too.
Ooh.
Sorry. PG-13.
It's speculated that John promised to be home for the baby's birth the following summer. John had been there for all of Abigail's other pregnancies, and she reportedly received a premonition that this child would be a girl, because she had Nabby and then boy, and then she had a girl who died really young, remember, Susanna, and then she had 2 more boys, and she's like, it's going to be a girl. But it said premonition, so it was like she had a vision in her dream or something.
Crazy.
On Christmas night, 1776, after retreating across New Jersey and then crossing the Delaware River again, Washington's troops won the Battle of Trenton. Days later, on January 3rd, they won the Battle of Princeton. These victories brought in the new year and boosted the Continental Army's spirits. You may also know from studying art history that the first battle mentioned inspired the famous 1851 painting, Washington Crossing the Delaware, which was by Emmanuel Lutz. And he was a German-born American painter that was known mostly for that painting.
Which, by the way, that painting, if you don't know, is huge.
It's huge. I feel like I saw it in person. Is it like at the Smithsonian or the Met or
Met,
something?
I don't know where it is exactly.
I think it's at one of the museums I visited.
But it's like, if anybody doesn't know, it's like 6 to 7 feet tall, and then probably like 15 feet across. Like, it's big painting.
It's at the Met. Okay.
I was
like, I know I've seen that painting.
I was like, because I think I've seen it too, and I couldn't remember where it was. But
in New York, the
yeah.
Metropolitan.
The
Just for those who don't.
Museum.
Yes. Now, around this time, Abigail and John learned that Abigail's younger sister, Betsy, who wasn't so young anymore at 26, had gotten engaged to one of their father's boarders, Reverend John Shaw. Shaw was a Calvinist. In short, he was deeply religious, like the fire and brimstone kind of religious.
Yes.
And he thought humanity was doomed because of original sin. Now, funny enough, John had recently heard someone debunk this concept around the same time, saying that through the many generations between Adam and the 18th century, his sin was diluted. So original sin was like diluted through the generations. And so people in the 1700s shouldn't be so worried about original sin anymore.
I will say, if anybody is curious about this concept, just go and look up Calvinism. It's a whole sort of, there are many different religious philosophies, but this is just a specific one that...
I remember learning about it in college or something. And then also there's some stuff around predestination, which basically means that no matter what, everyone has been determined if they're going to heaven or hell before they're even born. So there's nothing you can do, which is pretty rough.
Yeah, that's a bit of a bummer.
It's pretty bad. Well, okay. So Sister Betsy, engaged to John Shaw, was afraid of becoming an old maid. And despite the fact that her own father didn't raise her with Calvinist beliefs, she was willing to marry John Shaw to prevent becoming a spinster.
Oh, okay. I mean, gosh, at that time, it makes sense.
Abigail didn't want Betsy to marry Shaw for the fear that she would have to submit to her husband's will. She was so stressed out about this engagement while she was pregnant, and her husband wasn't by her side. It was just like really not a great time to be fretting over her sister's engagement to a fire and brimstone guy.
I don't like where this is going.
She had insomnia with this pregnancy, and summer came early in 1777, so the heat made the insomnia worse.
Ugh.
John was warning her that because of the war, she may need to leave Braintree and join him in Philadelphia. She replied, quote, "The thought of being driven from my own habitation at this time is more distressing than ever. I can but poorly walk about the house."
Oh.
She was like so pregnant. She's like, please don't make me leave home.
Yeah.
John was feeling a bit guilty and anxious. He was not going to be able to make it home for the birth. He hadn't been there for Abigail during the dysentery epidemic that killed her mother, or for the smallpox epidemic and the long process of inoculation. He was feeling pretty bad. In early July, Abigail felt unwell, and on July 8th, she was, quote, taken with a shaking fit. I'm not totally sure if that means she had a fever with the shakes or a seizure or what.
Yeah.
But she was concerned afterward because she could no longer feel the baby moving.
Oh, no.
The doctor encouraged her not to be alarmed, but 3 days later, on July 11th, which was coincidentally John Quincy's 10th birthday, Abigail delivered a stillborn baby girl.
No.
She said in her letter to John that she didn't write for 5 days because it took her that long to get the will to write him.
Come on, yeah.
It appeared to be a very fine babe, and as it never opened its eyes in this world, it looked as though it were only closed for sleep. And I'm just like a little tearing up a bit. They named her Elizabeth after Abigail's mother. And actually, before the baby had come along and sometime while she was pregnant, John had proclaimed, "We should name her Elizabeth after your mother." So, pretty sad. Well, in a later letter to a friend, Abigail would confide something she'd never even told John. She believed that the stress, worrying about John, worrying about her sister, worrying John would be captured or killed, would it cause the stillbirth. So she eventually admitted to a friend that I'll mention later when I introduce the friend who this was.
Not surprising.
But let's move on. In addition to this loss, the economy in 1770 was in shambles because of the war. The Continental Congress printed paper money and inadvertently caused serious inflation, driving prices higher and the dollar's value low. a lot of men, including Bad Apple brother William, became privateers. And it was mentioned a minute ago. She was like, privateering was the government sanctioning of men or men on boats to attack and confiscate the enemy's military or trade ships in an effort to fund the war and the government.
So it sounds like mercenaries specifically for the Navy almost.
It's like piracy, but government sanctioned.
Okay, that's even cooler, to be honest with you.
Mercenary, I feel like, I guess, yeah. I mean, yes, it was piracy, basically.
That's pretty cool.
Government sanctioned piracy. Funny enough, Brother William was captured on a privateering voyage. He I guess, like, got captured, and it said it took him a very long time to get home. I don't know, but
useless Brother William.
Not a lot going on with Brother William. He did make it home, though.
Good, I guess.
A lot of people were being paid in cash by the government for the spoils of their privateering. And because of this, creditors were suffering because the currency lost 2/3 of its value over the next 2 years. So basically, they were like, you owe me £100. And then they'd get paid £100 in paper from the Continental Congress, which was worth like $30.
Right.
And then they'd pay their creditors back, and the creditors would really only get $30.
Economics.
Yeah. Inflation, time value of money, all that stuff. These creditors included John. He was a creditor.
Adams was a creditor?
Yeah, they have a lot of diversified interest. Given the influx of cash printed by the government, people were able to pay back their debts. Oh, you know what? I do this thing where I sometimes tell anecdotally what I'm about to read that I wrote. So anyway, because of all that inflation, like, they were getting paid back, like, I think I talked about last episode, sometimes the people working the land that owed them rent would work it off in work, but sometimes they'd pay it off in money. And I think what was happening is they were paying it off in money. They didn't have to work it off. They could pay it off. And so there wasn't really anything that could stop them from being like, here's $100 Continental cash.
Gotcha.
And so Abigail was sitting on a lot of cash that was worth diddly squat.
Ugh.
So she had to find a way to turn that cash into something that would hold its value. And let's just point out that it's the 1700s. Women don't have money or property. They can actually technically hold property, but if the property makes money, the husband gets the money. So, like, she was just holding down the fort, collecting the money. John's off in Philadelphia, or maybe at this point he's in York because the Congress had to move. I don't even know. He is not there. And so she's having to figure this stuff out.
It's crazy.
And this is her. This is how she is. And you're going to see more as we keep going.
It's really interesting even to hear somebody talk at this point in time. Let's be honest and say a woman talk about, like, hey, how can we convert my current money into assets that will not depreciate in the future? Like,
she's a smart
I'm barely
lady.
thinking about this kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I'm like, this is a woman from the 1770s doing this, having no legal rights for any of it, and is like, hey, let's, to an extent, make business actions. You know, it's pretty radical.
Yes. I mean, basically, this is the equivalent of, I'm going to take all my cash out of the bank and put it in gold.
That's really cool.
Like, kind of.
Yeah.
Well, the Continental Congress began to sell war bonds to finance the war. They offered a 4% interest rate, but nobody was buying, so they raised it to 6%. Apparently at 6%, Abigail said that was good enough, and she put some of the cash into the war bonds, choosing to hedge her bets on the government. John was impressed and said, quote, I know not what would become of me and mine if I had not such a friend to take care of my interests in my absence.
Capital F friend.
Yes. And, like, he's like, she didn't say, oh, John, can I buy war bonds? She just bought war bonds. I mean, I actually kind of wonder how that transaction happened because she's not allowed to have money, but her husband wasn't there. I think a lot of husbands weren't there and it was just happening.
I'd also be willing to bet there was probably a little bit of leeway that was given, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where if a woman showed up to a wherever bank or whatever they need to do paperwork,
the war
and
bond
say,
office probably,
right, and say, hey, I want to buy these war bonds.
They were like, sure, hand it over.
Not only that, but I would imagine there was probably a little question of like, well, where's your husband? Be like, where the hell do you think my husband is? You know what I mean? Like,
well, the other thing is there's some other things that happen where she's somewhere and people know who she is because she's John Adams' wife.
I was wondering.
So
that
she
too.
was famous. I guess famous isn't the right. She was known.
Famous for that day, I would say, yeah.
Now, in addition to inflation, there was a labor shortage, which was impacting Abigail and the farm. I think I mentioned that she hired a farm manager who was a free black man, and then that was the year before. But this year, mid hay harvest, he just like left to join the army.
Hey, you know,
he left her a bit high and dry. Salvation came in the form of a proposal in the Continental Congress. Instead of paying bond interest in the form of their deflated paper money, it would be paid in French currency, which was holding its value.
Ooh.
John was the only member of the delegation that opposed the bill. But it's speculated he did this out of principle because he knew he would benefit from it. So he said, I'm voting against this so no one can say that I was saying do this because it's actually going to help me.
Feels to track with John Adams.
It does. Either way, it helped them, and their return on investment was 24% year over year.
Hell yeah.
Without touching the principal.
That's insane.
Abigail was making money on her investment. Well, John was. It wasn't technically her money at all.
That sucks.
I mean, like, she would be living in poverty if it weren't his money doing well. So, like, she's protecting herself.
And luckily, I feel like John Adams was the type that would have been like, hey, you know, to an extent, what's mine is yours. You know, this is what our relationship is.
So, I mean, that's the thread on this. He is that, whereas a lot of people were not.
Right.
But we're going to keep talking about this.
That's cool.
In September 1777, Abigail received a letter from James Lovell, another member of the Continental Congress, Lovell. And I kept almost saying Lovell, but it's Lovell.
That's the astronaut from Apollo 13.
Oh, I didn't.
Tom Hanks' character is Lovell. His last name is Lovell.
Okay, there we go. So maybe they're related.
That's I was like, I wonder if there's a relation.
We'll have to look that up. And then we'll be doing an astronaut. Actually, that would be a good idea.
That'd be a great one. Oh my gosh, come on.
Put that in the list.
Yep.
Abigail panicked, worrying that she received this letter because John was unable to write for himself, meaning he could be sick or worse. She sat there for a few minutes with the letter, gathering her courage to open it. Luckily, John was fine. This was simply a map of expected battlegrounds of the British and Continental Army. Lovell explained why he wrote to Abigail with this map, rather than having John do so. He said that he just thought, I've only met you twice. I just admired your high regard for your husband. And he felt compelled to write to her.
Cool.
It was a little weird, I'd say.
Okay, not cool. That seems cool.
Borderline flirtatious, which was not only problematic because Abigail was married to John, but also because Lovell had a wife and children himself.
I'm thinking of modern times rather than then, you know, which is like if, you know, you texted me at night and was like, hey, dude, here's this thing. I think zero of it. You know what I mean? But a letter back in this day that's like, I admire your something is. Like
so I think that if we stopped right at that letter, you're right. But we keep going.
Okay.
Regardless of the gray area that this letter traveled through, Abigail was flattered. And she saw an opportunity. This was the beginning of a years-long correspondence in which Abigail was able to get information about the goings-on in Congress, even if John wasn't writing.
So she kind of was like, I'll play the game to get the info.
Yup. It's like Varys and his little birds.
Dude.
Except for not like...
Right.
Yeah.
Not as... Yeah.
That was a Game of Thrones reference. Sorry. If you like history, you might like Game of Thrones because it's like fake history.
So true.
In November, John was able to return home on a leave of absence, and after seeing Abigail and the family for a few days in Braintree, he headed to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, for what ended up being his last big court case of his legal career. It was a case about a British merchant vessel that was captured by privateers. But, as we all know, he had bigger things coming his way than practicing law.
I wonder what those things were.
Upon heading to Portsmouth, he asked Abigail to...
Wait. Portsmouth or Portsmouth?
I don't know. I always said Portsmouth.
I don't know.
Not
Bostonians,
Smith, but
forgive
Myth.
us on these pronunciations.
Well, this
in
is
general.
New Hampshire.
Okay, New Englanders,
Yes.
forgive us.
Portsmouth.
I don't know. I really don't.
Mouth.
And it's like one of those weird localisms. So yeah, we're sorry.
To PM New Hampshire. No. He asked Abigail to open all of his mail.
Oh.
She opened a letter from James Lovell to John. She learned then, before John did, that Congress wanted to send him to France as part of a 3-member delegation to convince Louis XVI to ally with the Americans. Abigail did not like this news.
I wouldn't imagine so. This is one of the few things that I did know about John Adams.
Letters would take months rather than weeks to arrive. He could be captured or killed. This was too much for her. After all these years of taking care of everything at home, John would have to take the treacherous journey across the pond during wartime and continue their seemingly endless time apart. Yeah. Since she had long yearned to travel, Abigail asked John to take her with him. He declined the request for the same reasons that she was worried about him going: the danger of the crossing, possibility of capture, or worse. Then John very thoughtfully suggested that he take John Quincy along with him. It's not safe enough, but let me take our son.
Yeah. Oh, not safe for you. I don't know what'll happen, but if our kid comes along, well, who cares?
I'm taking our eldest boy. In reality, John Quincy was 10, and he needed time with his father. Abigail had no choice but to acquiesce to the request.
Wow.
John and John Quincy set sail on a boat named the Boston on Valentine's Day, 1778, despite the fact that it was a winter crossing. Wow. So also not the safest.
Not ideal.
And I did look it up because I was like, it said February 14th in the book. And I was like, well, it's Valentine's Day. And then I was like, but wait, when did Valentine's Day? Is that like a hallmark? But it wasn't, obviously. It was like it's from like way early, like the year 1000, Saint Valentine. So
did not know that.
Now Hallmark has taken advantage, but it was actually like from a long time ago. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Almost as soon as they left, Abigail heard news of a failed assassination attempt on Benjamin Franklin, who was already in France, where the Johns were headed.
The Johns.
I just had to say that. Abigail's anxiety skyrocketed. Yeah. This was her chance to leverage her correspondence, though, with old Mr. Lovell. He assured her that the assassination attempt was only a rumor, which was a relief to Abigail. For the next 4 years, Abigail would write to Lovell when she needed something, and he would gladly reply, but not without a little flirtation. She tolerated this and sometimes admonished him if he went a bit too far, but the correspondence was helpful to Abigail for all those years. She had to wait 3.5 months until May of 1778 before she learned the status of her son and her husband's journey to Paris. A newspaper had reported that the Boston had been captured by a British privateer. Luckily, Abigail was like, well, maybe it got captured after they arrived.
Yeah.
She found out a few weeks later that was actually right. They had disembarked in Bordeaux, and the Boston was captured later.
So, like, all I can think of is obviously comparisons to myself, and it's like, I'm in the process of looking for a new job. Mm-hmm. And you know what I'm talking about here is like sometimes if you're talking to a prospective employer and you're a little stoked about it, maybe just a little bit, even like 10%, like, oh, this could be a good thing. Their email response 3 days is like, what are you guys doing to me? You're murdering
like
me
years.
right now. You're killing me. A week is like, now you're just being rude. Okay. Like, what are you even doing to me? Because I'm very anxious. Imagine Aaron goes across the ocean. And then all of a sudden you learn via newspaper, Aaron's ship was captured. And now you just got to sit for like 3 weeks and just go like, I have a suspicion that he got off the boat before the boat got captured. And you just got to wait it out. You just got to sit, chill. And like for 3 weeks, sit on the anxiety of not knowing if your husband is like in the brigs.
Yep. I mean, you do
insane.
know this is a tiny squirrel, but you know our like story of when Aaron asked my dad, like he went, I'm not property, but he did fly to Texas to say, hey, Mark,
yes,
may I marry your daughter?
Yes.
I'd like to marry your daughter. And he took a secret trip.
Yes.
And then his flight was delayed. And he's a terrible liar. So he just, in a panic, shut his phone off. So I'm like up in Aspen with Cousin Caroline, having a lovely time with Aunt Mary and Cousin Caroline, and he's just not responding to me.
There you go. Then you know.
And I am literally, I'm like, do I call a hospital? Because he was supposedly in Wyoming teaching a class. Anyway, the same thing.
Yes. It's just a crazy thing to think about. Like, having to sit on that.
That was a solid 6 hours. Let me just
yeah, and that's
not
what I'm,
weeks and months.
Exactly. It's like okay, continue. Sorry.
No, the next yeah. So okay, she found out a few weeks later that John and John had disembarked in Bordeaux. The Boston was captured later, and on June 30th, she finally got a letter from John. His tone was lighthearted and was a severe juxtaposition to her crippling anxiety.
Yeah.
He said, "To tell you the truth, I admire the ladies here. Don't be jealous. They are handsome and very well educated. They're accomplished and are exceedingly brilliant, and their knowledge of letters and arts exceeds that of the English ladies much, I believe."
Oh, stupid man.
She's having a freaking meltdown, and he's like, "The women here are really cool.
Stupid,
but don't be jealous."
Stupid man. This man is.
But then let's flip it around. He's been on a journey on a boat across the ocean in the winter. He finally gets to France. He's walking around in Paris with his son. He's eating He's eating delicious food. He's like having a grand old time. And he's just like, "Oh, hey, wife, let me tell you, the people here are wonderful." Like that was just an excerpt that kind of exemplified his tone deafness, but also he doesn't know that he's supposed to be stressed out.
And I think that's kind of my point, though, is that it's like, bro, of all the things, hey, talk about Paris being great. You didn't notice there are women here? Oh, I guess there are women here. Huh. I've mostly been interacting with men. Bro, you are 3 months letter correspondence away from your wife. You don't be putting that kind of crap in her brain of like, by the way, some fine looking ladies around here. Like, it's just, dude, that is just a bad move.
There was one part later on in this whole separation where he does talk about, like, she was like talking about the potential for infidelity, but like she wasn't really worried. But like, anyway,
I'm glad they have trust and everything.
Yes.
It is, and that's very important. It's great. It's just one of those where like, buddy, John,
like, think about what you're writing.
Right. Like, you can say all the other things, but just omit that. Like, don't
if it was a text, it would have been like he wrote it all out and then it's like delete.
Right. Or do something say something that we all know about, which is just like, and that Ben Franklin sure does like his ladies out here. Yuck, 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 yuck. And then move on, bro.
Yep.
Like, you don't have to say anything else about this. Like, anyway.
Well, Abigail remember when she was younger, she had learned French, and she had actually thought that like French ladies were kind of smart. So as much as she was like, "Are you kidding me?" She was like, yes, like they are superior in education. And she'd read some analysis by someone, Dr. Sherbear, back in her youth, and she was relieved that he was just kind of like, everything's great. Like, that was good, but also she was like, really?
Yeah.
But back to the farm. It was losing a lot of money in the summer of 1778, largely in part to labor shortages, as I mentioned before. Abigail was concerned that if she didn't figure things out, she wouldn't be able to pay her debts. But being as smart as she was, she took action by firing all of her servants except for 2. She effectively implemented sharecropping with her land, getting help from her uncle Cotton Tufts to recruit 2 brothers. I know Cotton Tufts.
That's a good name.
To recruit 2 brothers who'd recently both married. The brothers would use the farm, its livestock, equipment, etc., and in return would split their harvest 50-50.
Okay.
So sharecropping wasn't a thing yet, but
right.
She was sharecropping.
Sure, and it's, by the way, it sounds like everybody, this sharecropping wasn't so bad.
No, this wasn't bad.
Sharecropping that came on later on, maybe not so good.
Yeah, this was like not terrible at all. Anyway, it was working mutually beneficial. Now, all of these changes, which she didn't tell John about for like an extra month or so after she'd made them, it didn't alleviate her mounting tax bills. Ironically, Americans had elected representatives who taxed them much higher than the British Parliament had before the Revolution.
Hey, man, we got a government to start.
They had a war to fund.
Yep.
But again, Abigail was smart, and she saw that the price of goods had increased so much in the United States that she asked for John to send, quote, "some saleable articles, which I will mention to be sent to the care of my uncle, a small trunk at a time containing 10 to 15 pounds of sterling worth of merchandise."
Smart.
She would then take some of the things that she needed for her own family, and then Uncle Tuff's son would sell the rest for her.
Also smart.
John shipped Abigail quite a few things, and while some packages were intercepted by British privateers, the markup she was able to apply to what she did get made up for the losses and made those losses inconsequential. She said of the crates of goods, If 1 in 3 arrives, I should be a gainer.
Dang, that's crazy.
And a gainer she was.
Okay, tell me more.
Her cousin worked on commission. The process of importing, well, was it smuggling?
That's true.
I'm kind of wondering. Of importing goods from John in Europe continued for a few years and made Abigail and John a pretty penny. Between this and the $1,200 that John had left her before he set sail for France, Abigail was able to buy another Federal Loan Office certificate for $700, further diversifying her investments in business ventures. She was so hungry for letters from John, and she didn't get as many as she wanted, but knew that some had been confiscated by privateers. John fell back into his habit of writing short, businesslike letters, frustrating Abigail. Abigail responded by writing rather furiously to John about how upset she was. She said that he had become cold, and this trip had, quote, chilled every drop of his blood.
Ugh.
This is their spat. These complaints hurt John, and he was actually homesick. He angrily replied in one letter, "I beg you would never more write me in such a strain." Oh. And he said that if she kept doing it, he would, quote, leave of writing entirely.
Oh, come on.
He wouldn't.
But I'm also like, buddy, I won't get into it, but you know what I'm thinking about
I
this.
summarized. She wrote a number of letters where she was like, "You're not writing me like you," and she was stressed. John then had John Quincy write and tell Abigail that it hurts his father to receive such letters, warning again that, quote, "If all your letters are like this, my papa will cease at writing at all." Kind of manipulative.
Okay, it's we won't get into it a lot, but it is a weird one where you kind of go like, John, come on, like you are her lifeline. Like she needs to hear from you, and she needs, affirmations, and she needs love, and she needs all these things. And at the same time, you can equally look at it and go, but also, gosh, man, John is in the throes of it right now and is literally working on forming our entire freaking country. And he is literally putting himself in line to be the first president. And then, to my knowledge, only kind of narrowly gets pushed out of it. I don't know the full story. I'm curious to see when we get there. But either way, it's a rock and a hard place situation.
Tough.
Yeah,
it's tough. Well, needless to say, Abigail quit with all those sorts of letters and said that they were due to, quote, an over-anxious solicitude to hear of your welfare.
Yeah.
And that was the last time she wrote harshly. In September of 1778, Congress voted to change the 3-member delegation in Paris to be a 1-member delegation of just Benjamin Franklin.
Oh, okay.
John wasn't sure if he was going to be sent somewhere else or be able to go home. After a few months of waiting to find out, he got impatient. So he packed up John Quincy and they got on a boat called the Sensible, which I thought was funny because sensibility and the Sensible. Anyway, the voyage happened so fast he wasn't able to write Abigail.
Oh my gosh. He
surprised her when they arrived on August 2nd, 1779. Hi, honey, I'm home. Now, John was home for only 4 months before heading back to Europe to negotiate peace with Britain. Ugh. He brought along John Quincy again, and also their middle son, Charles. Though Abigail wanted to come along too, John would not let her for a number of reasons. He also said, quote, "A lady cannot help being an odious creature at sea."
Oh, gosh.
I don't know. It kind of reminds me of... what is it in Pirates Caribbean? They're like, women can't be on boats. They're bad luck.
He says bad luck. He's like, bad luck having a woman. None of.
Is that Mr. Cotton's parrot?
Yeah, that's right. That's Mr. Cotton.
Sorry. I'm never over this cold.
It's been a while.
I don't know what it is. I honestly am concerned now that we have mold in our house.
Oh,
so we're gonna have to get that tested.
I feel like every single episode of House ever there's always a point where they're going, could it be mold?
Could it be mold?
And they go and search for mold.
Well, okay. I've only seen a few episodes of House and I didn't see that one, but yeah, it could be mold, I guess. Excuse me. Okay. Young Charlie was excited to be considered mature enough to come along. Nevertheless, on November 12th, when mature Charlie said goodbye, he cried.
Oh, poor little fella.
The journey across the ocean was pretty rough. Once close to the shore, on the other side, they sprung a leak and had to get out of the boat in the town of Ferrol on the northwest tip of Spain, Ferrol. Rather than wait an unknown amount of time until the boat was ready to keep sailing, John just decided that they should make the rest of the way by land.
Oh, interesting.
It was a cool 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
With his 2 sons.
Yeah.
Almost 4 months later, in February, Abigail learned that everybody made it to Paris. 4 months of anxiety.
Jeez.
On the journey to Paris, John had sent some cargo from Bilbao, Spain, that included necessaries for the family. That was their code. They always said everything was for the family rather than for resale or, like a markup. Apparently, 84% of the items in the package were intended for resale and not for the family. I thought that was a very specific percentage.
Yeah,
but
84%.
Yeah, now, around this time, young Nabby was trying to get the courage to ask her father for some French gauze, lace, and ribbon, which John called frippery.
What are gauze?
Gauze, it's like a fabric.
Oh, okay.
Just like a gauze fabric would, think about gauze you'd put on a wound.
Yeah.
So think about like fabric that's sturdier, but that's like kind of meshy.
Oh, okay.
But John called it frippery. Frippery.
Frippery.
This went completely against Abigail and John's strong sense of frugality. Abigail came to her daughter's defense and told John, quote, "And as little of what you call frippery is very necessary towards looking like the rest of the world."
Yeah.
Nabby just wanted to, quote, "appear when she goes from home a little like those her own age."
Okay, I feel like this could have been a conversation I was having with my parents when I was a teenager.
Oh, definitely.
Of like, hey, can I get that thing from PacSun? No, you can get the jacket from Costco. And I'm like, guys, I would like to look like a teenager of my age.
Yes, exactly. It was the same.
They were good though. They got me. We would get some cool stuff every once in a while.
Yeah.
But we were also a Costco family, I'll be honest. So anyway.
Well, we just got Costco, so we didn't. We were Sam's family.
Hey, shout out to Costco. Good stuff.
Oh no, the shirt I'm wearing is not from Costco, but one shirt I was wearing like yesterday was from Costco. Anyway,
Costco makes clothing for giants, and I'm just a little guy, so like none of their stuff has ever fit me ever. That's why, including when I was young. Oh. So yeah, that's why I've never liked Costco clothing. But anyway,
well, I did read recently. We'll be done. I read recently that apparently the Costco leggings are the same as the Lululemon leggings.
Really?
Leggings. I don't know. I've never had either. So
nor have I.
A few months before, John had started.
Stop picturing me in leggings.
Really threw me off, folks. No, honestly, when I pictured it, you had like Umbro shorts over your leggings, like you're a runner.
That's probably how I would do it too.
Well, it's cold in Colorado.
It's true.
Okay, John had started breaking his shipments of things for the family up into multiple shipments from multiple couriers. That way it was like smaller and diversified, and if one boat got stolen or privateered, the others would go through.
Right.
But because of this, he couldn't buy things at wholesale prices. Abigail disagreed with this idea, and ultimately John changed his mind back and went to shipping fewer, larger shipments.
This is hilarious.
Concluding that the way that Abigail had initially said to do things was the right way.
It's like business negotiations, like a partnership on a new business. It's hilarious.
It was funny. I don't know. So Abigail realized that because diplomatic correspondence could be sent for free, if John shoved a pair of silk gloves or a little bit of lace into his letter, they wouldn't have to pay for the shipping.
That is devious, and I love it.
A little bit of questionable tactics, I think. But times were tough, and Abigail was just doing what she could.
Hey, I'm going to say it's a little bit of like personal justice for like all that John is giving to the country. She's like, hey, look, you can pay for a little bit of extra lace in a letter. You know what I mean? I'm kind of with it.
I mean, I know, but then we think about like politicians and how they like take kickbacks and stuff, and like this is not a kickback.
I was going to say there's a long shot from being like, hey, why don't you use my private jet to go over to Martha Stewart, and then being like, hey, we're going to use the government free mail to send me some
Martha's Vineyard.
What did I say?
You said Martha Stewart.
I'd imagine she's on Martha's Vineyard.
It's her vineyard.
It's dude, I think there probably was a point in time as a kid where I thought Martha's Vineyard was owned and controlled by Martha Stewart.
Is Martha's Vineyard in Connecticut or Massachusetts?
It's I think it's Massachusetts. It's an island. It's a little island.
I know. Well, now I'm wondering because like when did that come about? Because they lived in Massachusetts.
But anyways, yes. But hey, look, Martha was also, she got in trouble for some insider trading, so.
Yeah, she sure did. Martha's Vineyard in Dukes County, Massachusetts.
MA, there we go.
Yep. Okay. Where were we? I just got distracted by Google Maps. Okay. Abigail further expanded her venture in the fall of 1780 to her friend Mercy Otis Warren. She had her teenage son, George, sell all items on consignment, just like Abigail was having her cousin do it. Mercy Warren said that the prices were too high and she couldn't sell anything. And Abigail replied, well, give them back to me. But it was a lesson because apparently some of the things that they were getting from Bilbao, Spain were like no longer in fashion. And so that was part of the reason they were having a little trouble selling them. And then I'm skimming over a lot of detail of this like business, but like sometimes it seemed like they wouldn't be able to sell gloves in a certain color. And then lo and behold, 6 months later, they could sell them all. And it was just like, it was a little bit of up and down, just as it is with any business.
This feels like the Addams Family eBay shop. You know what I mean?
Basically.
Which, by the way, how we haven't done an Addams Family
I
is beyond me. We're in episode 3.
I've read so many things that are like the Addams Family, and I think that in my head. Anyway. John was trying to find some special fabric in Holland and said that the prices were, quote, horrid. But Abigail assured him that it wasn't the price you paid, it was the price that you sold at that mattered. With her continued success, John eventually told Abigail to contact the European trading houses directly.
Whoa.
Cut out the middleman. He trusted her so much at this point that he financed all the purchases, but stayed out of the business.
Dang.
Which was a relief to both of them.
Serious.
And also awesome.
Super awesome.
In addition to funding her import business, John was supposed to be getting paid a salary by Congress, which they would sometimes forget to do.
Whoopsies.
Abigail turned to her friend, Mr. Lovell, and to get him to get Congress to pay John's salary. So it was also funny because this happened more than once. And one time they paid, but they missed some expenses or something that they were supposed to pay back. And she was like, hey, James Lovell, by the way, they shortchanged me. Can you go back to them? And he was like, it said in my book, the speculation was if she hadn't had that friend that was the intermediary, she probably would not have pushed back. But she had a dude to go yeah. I thought that was pretty funny. She's like, hold on a minute. You still owe a few bucks here.
She's like, by the way, are you keeping track of the numbers? Because I am. Basically what that was.
She's got her ledger like the mob does.
Just go straight up. I'm starting to see her as a bookie.
Yeah.
She's reaching into her little whatever you would call her corset and pulling out a book of all her well, this guy owes me this.
I'm pretty sure that's probably exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So Mr. Lovell then tried to help Abigail with an insider trading tip. Congress was going to redeem the continental currency at a higher price than its actual market price. So he advised that she put all of her money into the paper currency. Luckily, she ignored him because the money's value plummeted and she would have lost almost everything if she had taken his advice. Part of the reason that he made this suggestion, though, is he thought he was helping her because he had really actually developed a crush on her. So before it was a little bit oh, wow, this woman's really interesting and I'm going to just chat with her. But he really over the years started to like her. As far as I can tell, though, they didn't see each other ever. It was all letters. They were corresponding.
Attracted to her mind.
I guess so.
And I'm hearing, and I can't fight this feeling anymore.
So around this time, a letter written by Lovell had been that had been intended for Elbridge Gerry. So they were all delegates for Massachusetts. He'd written a letter to Mr. Gerrymander. It was intercepted and published by, the enemy.
Uh-oh.
This happened a couple times. People's letters would be published. In it, Lovell had declared that he had no intention of returning to his home state to see his wife, ever.
Whoa.
Abigail was appalled and also realized that he truly had feelings for her. She'd kind of been suspecting it, but after seeing this, and she saw the writing on the wall. She confronted him in a letter about his lack of intent to see his wife again. And this, let's just say, this struck a chord because her husband was off in Europe and all she wanted was for him to come home. So like him declaring this in a letter to some dude he worked with was like, are you kidding me? Like that's her worst nightmare. So it really struck a chord for her. She tactfully did not ask about his feelings for her, though. She was like, she kind of knew the answer and she didn't want anything written.
She didn't want to entertain it either.
No. He said that he had not seen his wife for almost 4 years, and the reason he hadn't been home was because he was afraid that if he did go home, he would get her pregnant, and they couldn't afford it.
Okay.
He also said that if he took a leave of absence to go home and visit, he wouldn't have any income and he wouldn't have enough money to pay for the family he already had.
Okay.
Abigail accepted this explanation. Also in there, I didn't put this in, but now I kind of want to say it. There was an innuendo joke between him where when Abigail got pregnant that time that John came home, like immediately, he made a joke about how John really showed his patriotism. And he didn't want to show patriotism in the form of to his wife or whatever. But like, I did think that was kind of funny. Now, what Abigail didn't know, or it's suspected that she didn't know, is that during Lovell's Harvard days, he'd fathered a bastard child. In spite of this, their correspondence continued. I mean, she was satisfied with his explanation of why he wasn't going home. She also had an interest in keeping the lines of communication open so she could get information. Once, a shipment sent to Abigail was accidentally redirected to Philadelphia. The items had become waterlogged, and Lovell had like gotten it and dried it out by his fire before he forwarded it to her. Like he was helping her out.
He was smitten, it sounds like.
Yeah. Eventually, though, a rumor about an affair between Lovell and his Philadelphia landlady permanently ended Abigail's friendship with him. Despite his denying it, it wasn't his first time of having to deny something like this or backtrack on suspicious behavior. This time, the rumors were career-ending, and he gave up his seat in Congress over them. She was sad to lose her friend, but possibly more, she was sad to lose her inside man in Congress.
Yes. Now, refresh me really quick. The Declaration of Independence was Lovell of those two guys we mentioned that we hadn't heard of?
No,
Okay, I couldn't remember
neither
those
was
names
Lovell.
were.
Livingston and something else.
Yeah.
He's not one of the guys that signed.
It was like living in Russell or something. I mean,
Yeah, I could scroll up and find it.
Don't worry about it. I wanted to confirm that
This
it
guy
wasn't
was
him.
just another delegate,
Okay.
but he wasn't one of the committee of five.
Okay, because I was going to say, I was like, oh, that might be the reason why we hadn't
No.
heard of him, is that his kind of
No.
reputation got tarnished. But never mind.
Livingston, I think, is the name that you're thinking of. Okay. In 1780, things weren't looking so good for the Americans in the war. When the French had entered the war, the British had headed south. The war was underfunded. Abigail continued to update John on the goings-on back home, and she told him, quote, "What a politician you have made of me." That's a reference to the fact that she followed politics closely. The term politician was not used the same way as it is today, meaning a person in politics.
Interesting. Okay.
Abigail's business ventures kept her afloat for the next few years, and her yearning for John continued. In January of 1781, Abigail had just read a 4-volume work called, now this is a mouthful, Letters Written by the Late Right Honorable Philip Dormer Stanhope, Earl of Chesterfield, to his son, Philip Stanhope.
Wow. I thought I was going to say second Lord of Chester.
Now, Abigail had requested that John get her a copy of this. It's not a book. It's a 4-volume compilation of letters.
Yeah.
It was a very popular to read at the time. Partially because Stanhope Chesterfield dude was he was a really good writer, and so people just really wanted to read it. John refused to get her a copy, though, partially because the referenced son, Philip Stanhope, was the bastard son of Chesterfield, and John thought Chesterfield a hypocritical, polished libertine. A libertine is a person, especially a man, who behaves without moral principles or a sense of responsibility, especially in sexual matters.
Now I know the line from The Music Man when he says, "Libertine men and scarlet women in ragtime."
Well, they would go with Scarlet Women.
And that's what I'm saying. It's like, but it's hilarious to think now that it's libertine men and scarlet women in ragtime. That's the anyway.
Well, there also was a bar, I don't know if it's still around in Dallas, called the Libertine, which is kind of funny.
Oh, that's cool.
Okay. Abigail, resourceful as she was, got herself an abridged copy of this compilation of letters. She was not impressed and was actually disgusted by Chesterfield's quote, "abuse upon our sex."
Oh.
Chesterfield wrote to his son that women were, this is from the compilation of letters, women were only children of a larger growth. They have an entertaining tattle and sometimes wit, but for solid, reasoning good sense, I never in my life knew one that had it, or who reasoned or acted consequentially for 4 and 24 hours together.
That's pretty harsh.
It's very harsh. Chesterfield had insulted women as a whole, including their sensibility, and Abigail wrote to Mercy Otis Warren about it. She said, "I could prove to his lordship, were he living, that there was one woman in the world who could act consequently more than 24 hours."
All I can think of is Jack Nicholson from As Good as It Gets, when he's a writer and this fan comes up to him and goes, "I just have to ask you, how do you write women so well?" And he goes, I think
about a man
and take away reason and accountability." So good.
I had forgotten that I remembered that line. Oh,
Also one of my all-time favorite movies.
terrible line. I mean, terrible sentiment, but amazing line.
I mean, his character in the movie is
He's
he's a
basically
total jerk.
Chesterfield.
Yes, he's a total jerk.
Yeah, he's Chesterfield. Well, Abigail learned that Mercy had penned a rebuttal essay to reading this too. She'd read it as well, and she wrote a letter to her son, writing all about what she thought about Chesterfield's letters. Abigail took it upon herself to send the essay to the editor of the Independent Chronicle, just a newspaper. They published the essay along with Abigail's introduction letter.
Cool.
Though neither woman was named in print in the paper, the introduction to the essay was Abigail's first publication.
Very cool.
So she's published, even though nobody knows.
Any chance that you happen to know what names they published them under?
I think they
just
like
anonymous?
Yes,
Okay.
anonymous letters. In the summer of 1781, Abigail was informed by John that little Charles would be traveling home from Europe alone.
Oh, great.
John Quincy, destined for greatness, had just turned 14, and John allowed John Quincy to join a diplomatic envoy to Russia. Young, sensitive Charles, left behind, did not adjust well. He began to beg his father to let him go home to America. And finally, John said yes. At that time, they were in Amsterdam, so Charles left on the American boat, the South Carolina. He was accompanied by Major William Jackson of the Continental Army. So he didn't send him completely alone. There was an adult. It was 4 months before Abigail heard the news of her child. The South Carolina had made a stop at the direction of its captain in La Coruna, Spain, in an effort to pick up some merchandise to sell when they got back. So they made port somewhere in Spain to pick up some stuff to sell in the United States when they got back.
Okay.
But it was taking a really long time for them to get going. It took so long that William Jackson took Charles to Bilbao again, another Spain town. And once there, again, they had to wait for several months to stay home. So they were waiting because the captain decided, and there was a dispute, and everyone was like, "Dude, you're let's get going." And he's like, "No, I'm waiting for this stuff." So they left. Then they get stuck in Bilbao, Spain. In November, Abigail got word that Charles had been in Spain for 2 months earlier. So 2 months after he'd been there, she got word that he was there. And finally, after 3 months of waiting, Charles was able to take the Cicero to the port of Beverly outside of Boston. Some ships that had left before the Cicero had left Spain had already arrived in Boston, and she knew he was supposed to be on the Cicero.
Oh my gosh.
So she's freaking out even more. But they finally got there on January 29th, 1782, almost 6 months after leaving Amsterdam. So poor Charles is "Can I go home?"
And he was about, do you know what age he was at this point?
14. No, he was 12.
12. That is
He was a
so.
little boy.
I mean, don't
He
get me
wasn't
wrong.
a little boy, but he was a little boy.
I think kids grew up faster back in those days for sure, but still to think.
I don't think
like,
his voice had dropped yet.
Right. I'm just imagining like what an adventure that was. I mean, scary for sure, but like in retrospect, when you grow and look back at that time, it must have been such a cool adventure to be a part of, you know?
I don't know that it was really seen that way. I think it was stressful because they was like ready to go home and he was with like a random dude, and he was part of the reason that he was sent home in the first place, allowed to go home, is because, and they talk about this, and I'm going to talk more about him later in his later life, but he kind of always had some emotional problems.
Okay.
So they were talking at the beginning, like when John said, let me take Charles with me. And then he was talking about how Charles was so delightful and he was so brave and he was doing all these wonderful things. And Abigail was a little bit like, really? My Charles?
Right.
And then when John Quincy left, he like just kind of fell apart and he needed to go home. But then it took him 6 months to get home after going to 2 other Spanish towns and then finally going home.
Okay, so let's put it this way. If the same thing had happened to John Quincy, grand adventure.
Yes, that would be perfect. Yes.
Grand
but
adventure.
Charles was
it
kind
was
of not.
bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Now, as we've established, Abigail had become a shrewd businesswoman and investor. In addition to her mercantile business, she began making loans managed by her uncle, Cotton Tufts. I just have to say Cotton Tufts every time.
I like it. I support it.
It's like, yes. And then actually, I read on some Wikipedia page that he was her cousin, but it is said uncle every time. I've read it in many places, but they were related. Whatever. With this, she was able to save enough money to buy a new carriage. She also decided to get into real estate.
Ooh.
She had her eye on some land in Vermont. She told John in April of 1782, "I have my heart set upon it. I am loath to relinquish it." In the summer of 1782, Colonel Jacob Davis of Worcestershire, no one can say that word.
Worcestershire.
It's not even a real word.
Worcestershire.
Of the sauce. I don't know. He paid Abigail a visit about Vermont. He said that the plots were only available to, quote, persons of character and property. And Abigail was one of those.
I was going to say.
Abigail, heeding the old adage of nothing venture, nothing have, which it's an old version of the old adage.
I was going to say, I haven't heard that.
Nothing
adage.
venture, nothing have. Like, isn't it nothing ventured, nothing earned? I think
or gained is often.
Gained, yeah. She decided to pull the trigger on this purchase. Now, the rules were you could only buy 330 acres per person of these plots of land in Vermont. So she bought one in John's name, and then she used 4 straw men to buy 3 more, or 4 straw men to buy 4 more. These men deeded the land to each of her 4 children.
Oh my gosh.
She was the only one that didn't get any land herself because as a married woman, she couldn't.
So, okay, if my math is right, are we talking about 1,800 acres?
Yeah, about, I think, yes. I think it ended up being like 1,600 and something. Maybe the plots weren't equal size, but 1,600 something acres.
Gosh, that's amazing.
John got word of all of this and he told her not to meddle more with Vermont. But the deal was done. He was a little like perturbed. There was a little bit of, there was some discord with this Vermont land about like who really had the right. And I'm not talking about having stolen it from Native Americans.
Sure.
It was among the settlers and
among the whites
who had the right to have it. And there was a dispute, and Congress actually like decided on it. And that's why this Colonel Davis like came along and said, "Okay, you can buy it now."
Okay.
So she'd had her eye on it for a while, and then it really came up for sale.
I was honestly waiting for you to be like, John, this Abigail to John. So I've been looking at this little piece of property. It's called Vermont. Like I was waiting, honestly.
No, they didn't own all of Vermont. So Abigail purchased the land for £55, 44 pounds up front and 11 later. So she had credit.
Okay.
I know.
Okay, wait, no. Not total for the land. $55.
Pounds.
55 pounds for all of it. No. Like 1,800
That's what it said.
acres.
I can double check this.
It's not per 100 acres.
Nope. So it's worth 11,633 pounds today.
And that's still stupid. Okay.
June of 1782, Abigail received a letter from John that was only 6 weeks old, basically hot off the presses.
Young letter.
Yes. He'd gotten formal recognition from the Dutch of U.S. independence. This meant some funding would be coming the way of the American government, and hopefully things would be looking up. Abigail was bolstered by the news, and she replied with a doubling down of the sentiments of her Remember the Ladies letter from 1776. She said that women were deprived of a voice in legislation and obliged to submit to those laws which are imposed upon us. As of late, all states had revised or rewritten their constitutions, but none had included voting rights for women. She believed that women had no expectation of ever benefiting from the nation's victories and were often the worst victims of its defeats. She said, quote, "Men can only die on the field of battle, while women have the misfortune to survive those whom we love most."
I feel like if this was an episode of Arrested Development, a character would go, "And just remember, everybody, when you go and do this, I just ask you, remember the ladies." And the narrator goes, "They didn't." That's how this feels to me.
Oh my gosh. They didn't.
They didn't.
Now, so it is true though. I mean, we've established and will continue to show that John was kind of uncommon. He was letting her do all of this stuff. But the thing is, it wasn't like he was going to turn around all these other delegates.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. They didn't.
They didn't.
Now, Abigail's letter concluded, she said that she should praise herself. She said, quote, "I feel that it is my due for having sacrificed so large a portion of my peace and happiness to promote the welfare of my country."
My life.
Yes. So she basically said she sacrificed all of her time with John, and she was going to give herself a pat on the back about it anyway.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. At this point, they had not seen each other for almost 3 years. Jeez. So before, I don't think they'd ever gone more than like 6 or 9 months.
Jeez.
About 9 months. In September of 1783, the war was officially over with the Treaty of Paris. Abigail's import business was dying down, and by November, Abigail was just miserable. She missed John. She started asking indirectly in her next series of letters to be allowed to come to Europe with him. She was also sad that she didn't hear much from her son, John Quincy. She would have been really sad if she'd known that when John Quincy was in Russia, he and his father maintained a lively correspondence.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. But yeah, things were dying down on the whole like mercantile business. Abigail had remained good friends with Mercy Warren during all this time. So much so that Nabby, her daughter, would go to stay with the Warrens. Abigail suspected that Nabby preferred the Warrens' house to her house. Nabby was independent and introverted. She hadn't written to her brothers very much in Europe. At 17, she passed up social events that were the events of the season, like the Harvard graduation that we mentioned before. She was like, I don't really want to go to that. Even 12-year-old Charles had been excited to attend Harvard graduation, even though no one in the family was graduating that year. So they just went for fun. Yeah, they just went. Nabby had some social anxiety. I mean, anxiety seems to run in the family.
Which really quickly on the Harvard thing, by the way, I'd imagine a part that would make it exciting was that back in those days, the classes at Harvard were like 30.
Yeah, I don't know how big. They were smaller for sure. I actually
Really
went to an
small.
event at Harvard graduation a couple of years ago.
Really?
So Aunt Mary's friend, Jenna, she has a daughter named Mariana. And Mariana went to Harvard.
Cool.
And when Caroline visited me in New York, and it was Harvard graduation time, so we took the train up to Harvard, and I got to go to it was a huge field with like tables everywhere, and we were eating, and there were all these people there. But I want to tell you something. So we maybe need to edit this out. I don't know. So the other day, you were like kind of a little bit stressed about your job hunt, and I was like, it's all going to work out. And you said, oh, it will become clear and obvious.
Well, I said to quote Aunt Mary.
To quote Aunt Mary, but actually Aunt Jenna is the one who says that. Aunt Mary says it to all of us. Aunt Jenna also says it to us, but it's easier for me to be like my Aunt Mary than my Aunt Mary's friend Aunt Jenna, who's not actually my aunt.
I feel lied to and betrayed.
Sorry, Aunt Mary and Aunt Jenna. But no, I texted your text to me, and I was like, Aunt Mary, look what Daniel said. And she goes, well, you know it's Aunt Jenna. And I was like, no, I know. But like Aunt Mary says it all the time, too. It's her friend since she was growing up. Like it's become a a saying of both of them.
I still am crediting it to Aunt Mary.
Okay, well, it's fine. Aunt Jenna's not sad, probably.
Well, hey, Aunt Jenna, credit to you too. Thank you.
And Mariana, great job for going to Harvard.
Hey, Harvard gay.
I don't know if any of you listen to the Aunt Mary does, but let's see. So, okay. Charles had been excited to attend the Harvard graduation. Nabby had some social anxiety. She opted not to go. That being said, she wanted to go to Holland to help her father.
Sweet.
She decided she could be his housekeeper. She was rather standoffish, and Abigail joked that Nabby would please John due to her quiet manner.
That's pretty funny, actually.
She's like, "Oh, you'll like your daughter. She's not going to bother you."
I think it's sad that she has to explain to her, like to the dad of the daughter, "Hey, you'll like her."
Well, she's also like a teenager at this point, and he's been gone since she was,
I get it. It's just sad and
it's
funny.
Pretty sad, yeah. Though Nabby was annoyed that her mother believed her to be too stately. Nabby was just kind of stiff. She described herself basically in the same way. Nabby said about herself, "I verily believe I possess too large a share of that indifference that some persons attribute to me, and that I am the same cold, indifferent girl. I have sometimes been at a loss to know whether I have a heart or not." So she was like just kind of reserved and a little firm.
Yeah.
I don't know. Nabby, like her mother, corresponded with her friends, but it was not about books like Abigail had done. John asked what book to send Nabby. He was like, "I'll send you a book." And Nabby just said, "Whatever." It's like that term worked in the 1700s. Now, she did, however, like to talk about boys.
I was going to say, she wasn't talking about books, she talking about boys.
A boy named Royal Tyler, Royall, two
Like the
L's.
Royal Tenenbaums. That's awesome.
Is it 2 L's in Royal Tenenbaums?
No, it's one, but still.
Royal Tyler. Had become a boarder with the Cranches, and therefore was, in her mind, unsafely close to her cousin Betsy. Royal Tyler had been a bit of a philanderer as a young man, though he admitted to it and also maintained that he was now reformed. She warned Betsy about getting close to Royal. Ironically, Nabby was soon being courted by none other than Royal Tyler himself. Ooh. John considered Royal a rake. And I had to look up what a rake was. It was a dissolute and immoral person, especially a man who indulges in vices or lacks sexual restraint. So kind of like a libertine.
So you know who we were talking about on the last episode, Shakespeare and Bob Dylan? Mm-hmm. Bob Dylan uses the term rake. He'll call people a rake a lot in his songs.
I feel like I had heard it, but then I was reading it again. I was like, I need to look that up and make sure I get the gist. Now, Royal Tyler had in his youth inherited a 17,000 pound fortune from his father, which is about 3.5 million in today's dollars.
Too shabby.
And he'd spent a lot of it. He wasn't out of money, but he probably had spent more than half.
Jeez.
Apparently, like Abigail's former friend, John Lovell, he'd also fathered a bastard child.
Oh, joy.
But his was at Harvard with the cleaning lady.
I guess that's better.
It wasn't better. It was just different. Like his was the landlady in Philadelphia. Royal Tyler's was Harvard with the cleaning lady. Anyway.
Yeah.
Now reformed, he had a law office in Braintree, which was already successful after being open only 6 months. Abigail, though cautious, liked him for his sensibility, a quality she looked for and she hoped he would bring out in her own daughter, Nabby. Abigail tried to slow the courtship. She wanted to know what John would think. Royal Tyler was already bringing out a passion in literature that Nabby had, and he was kind of courting Abigail. He was like a very well-read and looking at the beautiful art, and he was a guy that practiced sensibility, which was the thing that she liked.
But he also understood, if you want to get in with the daughter, you got to get in with the in-laws.
Yep. Except that he really could only try and get in with Abigail at the time. It turns out John was not happy about Royal.
Uh-oh.
About Royal's past tendencies, John said, "If they were ever in him, they are not yet out." People don't change. He didn't say people don't change. I said that.
That's basically what he's saying.
When Abigail learned of John's position, she pulled back her support for Royal. Also plaguing Abigail's nerves, in addition to Nabby's, courtship, was the question of who would educate Charles and Tommy. You know, she's always worried about how the kids are going to get educated. She came to a surprising conclusion, though. She'd never liked her brother-in-law, John Shaw, the Calvinist husband of Betsy.
Yes.
But she had to admit he was a pretty good tutor. So she dropped her boys off at her sister's in mid-April of 1783, and with that, the Adams house was a girls-only house.
Ooh.
Abigail Nabby, Abigail's niece, Louisa Smith, along with two servant girls, worked together to keep the house in order. Little Louisa, she fretted that when John would come back from Europe, whenever that was, that he would send her away.
Oh, for any reason? Just...
She just was like, I'm not his daughter. I don't know. She was just worried. She's a little kid. She was like, it's a couple years later, so she's probably like 6. The house seemed dull, though, without Abigail's sons there. She set out to get out of her import business. With a letter in May of 1783, she told John, "My last adventure from Holland was most unfortunate. Goods fell and are now sold much below the sterling cost. Many are lower than I ever knew them. Ooh. I expect to close my mercantile affairs with this letter." So that was it.
It's, you know, like all of the white women from the mid-2000s, eBay just didn't work out in the long run.
I thought you were about to say LuLaRoe.
That too. I was just making a joke about everybody that had an eBay business for like 10 straight years.
I know someone who still does, and it's really good.
I do too, and they're still doing well, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. I just remember the eBay stores, though, because that was in like the 40-Year-Old Virgin. You know, she had an eBay store.
That's right. We sell your stuff on eBay.
You sell your stuff
excuse
on
me,
eBay.
I'd like to buy these shoes.
Was that Jonah Hill?
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. With the fish in the bottom?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't understand. I have the money. I just want to give you the money now and then take these shoes home and put them on.
You have to buy them on eBay. Okay. A few months later, on September 17th, 1783, Parson Smith passed away. It was quick, though. It was after a urinary tract blockage.
Ooh.
Ugh, yeah. His will was a bit peculiar. Parson Smith left Abigail's sisters with more than he left Abigail, probably because Abigail and John had been rather successful with various investments and ventures over the years. If we remember, like, Cranch wasn't so great. John
Right.
Shaw was like a reverend and a tutor, so it's not like they were rolling in the dough. Mary Cranch got the Weymouth Parish and the 18 acres of attached farmland. Remember, he had like been able to buy, their
Yes.
dad was pretty smart. Betsy Shaw received 46 acres in a nearby town. Betsy was also left with half a farm and a parcel of land that she split with Abigail. The farm in the nearby town of Medford yielded some rent, and Abigail referred to it as, quote, "my part of the rent." But you know how she'll write something and then she kind of backtracks? Mm-hmm. Then she backtracked. She was married, and the profits from any land she held went to her husband to use as he pleased. And that was actually due to something called the coverture doctrine. So Abigail apologized after she wrote that, and she said, "Forgive me if I sometimes use the singular instead of the plural. Alas, I have been too much necessitated to it," because she's been
alone
running
for
business.
years.
Yeah. Abigail wasn't alone. So many men had been away at the war. Many of their wives left behind felt this way, and they managed all these things and stuff. So definitely, it's not like we had a big total change in how things were done, but like things were slowly changing.
There was a
at this
slight
time.
shift in
The
like,
wa-
hey,
yeah.
hang on a second. We
The war
did this
triggered a
stuff.
shift,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay, cool.
Abigail also received 200 acres that had been her mother's. Remember, her mother was from a wealthy family. When her mother died, it went to her dad. And then when her dad died, he gave it to his daughters.
Right.
If John, okay, so she received these acres. If John wanted to sell that land, he needed her permission. So she couldn't, if it was a profitable piece of land, she couldn't have the money. And if he wanted to sell it, she had to say that he could sell it.
Interesting.
But it was like her land that wasn't her land.
Weird.
It was kind of weird.
Really weird.
So she wanted to invest more in Vermont, and she said she would give John the 200 acres if she could buy more land in Vermont. She was like, I'll give you my land for other land, please.
That's crazy.
Now, remember Abigail's deadbeat brother?
Yes. I was wondering about him.
Yeah, his father, though he had hoped that his son would turn his life around, In the end, Parson Smith was pretty realistic. William had abandoned his family at this point. His wife and children lived on a farm owned by Parson Smith, but some of the kids were with Abigail, or one was with Abigail, and then I think that eventually they all were with all the sisters. This farm was in nearby Lincoln, Massachusetts. So Parson Smith had like a lot of land. Parson Smith left the land not to his son, but to Cotton Tufts and Richard Cranch, with the direction for them to hold the land in a trust so that his daughter-in-law and grandchildren could stay on it. Parson Smith could not give the land to his daughter-in-law because of the aforementioned coverture doctrine. If he gave it to her, he would have effectively been giving it to his son. So he had to give it to somebody else to hold in a trust on her behalf.
Weird.
He found this loophole. The only thing that he actually did for his son in his will was cancel some of the debts that his son had to him, which I guess if you're dead, you're not collecting on the debts. So
Yeah.
Finally, Parson Smith had one other thing to take care of with his will. He still had a slave named Phoebe. He offered Phoebe a choice in his will. She could have emancipation, or she could stay as a slave with any of his 3 daughters on their properties. In his mind, option 2 would guarantee her financial future. But not surprisingly, Phoebe claimed her freedom.
I'm relieved. I was really hoping that was the route. I was hoping that wasn't gonna be like, and like many slaves, she decided to stay.
She did not. Like many slaves, she decided to go.
Sweet.
But actually, she's coming back in a minute.
Okay, cool. I mean, but maybe.
Yeah. No, in a good way. With the passing of her father, Abigail needed a break. She was stressed. Nabby's going crazy, but she got one, luckily. In November 1783, John requested that Abigail and Nabby come join him in Europe.
Hey, nice.
His commission in Congress to negotiate treaties with Britain and other countries had been renewed, and he needed to stay. But the length of time and the fact that the war was over, it made him comfortable to have them come along and come across the Atlantic to be with him. Despite the invitation coming in November, Abigail had a lot of affairs to settle, some of which John had only recently requested of her. So she didn't get to leave for 6 more months. Yeah. In addition to asking Uncle Cotton Tufts to manage their property and offering Phoebe and her husband the chance to live in the home rent-free in exchange for keeping it up to date.
Yeah.
So basically they're like, you're emancipated, but also you want this nice house to live in for a while?
Sick.
Yeah, it was pretty sick. There were a few other things. She also told Nabby to put her courtship with Royal Tyler just on hold until they returned from Europe.
Sure.
Interestingly enough, though, John had come around to the idea of Royal Tyler, and he'd sent a letter saying, go ahead, let her get married. And Abigail didn't get the letter. And so they sailed, it went on hold.
Whoopsie daisies.
Yeah, whoopsie daisies. I accidentally hit my mouse and scrolled to the very top of the page, so give me a second.
That's fine.
Okay. On Friday, June 18th, much of the town came to see them off. They stopped off to see John's mother, Susanna, and she said, "Fatal day. I take my last leave. I shall never see you again. Carry my last blessing to my son." Her second husband had died a few years earlier, and she was thinking a bit morbidly. Funny enough, she wouldn't die for another 15 years.
Oh, there we go.
So I just was like, oh.
She been a little sheepish when they all came back. She's like, oh, hey, you again. Take back what I said earlier.
Yes. On Sunday, June 20th, Abigail and Nabby boarded the Active, a merchant ship headed for London. She had never been on a boat on the open ocean, and the thought of being in the open water where she couldn't see any land was a bit unsettling.
Yeah.
This was an excerpt of what she wrote in her diary, and she didn't really keep diaries, but she did for this trip.
Makes sense.
Okay, I like this. The ship was soon under sail, and we went off with a fine wind. About 2:00, we reached the light when the captain sent word to all the ladies to put on their sea clothes and prepare for sickness.
Okay.
We had only time to follow his directions before we found ourselves all sick.
That's funny.
To those who have never been at sea or experienced this dispiriting malady, 'tis impossible to describe it. The nausea arising from the smell of the ship, the continual rolling, tossing, and tumbling contribute to keep up this disorder. And when once it seizes a person, it levels sex and condition. She's just like, doesn't matter who you are, you're getting sick.
Have you ever been seasick?
I haven't.
Okay. I'm normally really good with that kind of stuff. But I remember when I was like teenager, we took a little trip to Catalina Island off the coast of California, and we were in like the cheap boat, not the express boat that was like a luxury thing or whatever, which is fine. I know exactly what she's talking about here. Like when it gets you, it is the worst. It is unbelievably bad.
So I've only been on one cruise. I've been on quite a few boats in my life, many in the ocean, but it's always like a day trip or something, or like going out to go snorkeling or something like that. Aaron gets very, very seasick. He went fishing in Alaska last year, and the first day he took the bonine and all the things. Then somebody that was on the trip gave him, there's a patch you can put on the back of your ear.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Someone gave him one, and he was like, it was life changing. So like because he gets sick in the air, he gets sick everywhere. Okay, let me continue, and then there's a little bit more.
Yes.
She goes, my servant man was very attentive the first day, not sick at all, made our beds, and did what I should not have put upon him in any other situation, for my maid was wholly useless and the sickest of either. So it was his maid, Esther, and her sister, or her brother, Job.
Oh, hey, there we go.
Okay, 3 days later, she continued to describe the voyage. You who have never tried the sea can form no idea of it. Our stateroom is about 8 foot square with a small grated window. In this room were 3 cabins for 3 persons, between which 1 chair could stand. The door opened into the cabin where the gentlemen slept. We were obliged to keep open our door or be suffocated and poisoned so that we only closed it to undress and dress, and sometimes so sick that we fell from side to side in doing it. Like when they changed, they would get sick because they couldn't handle it. The first days, Job was obliged to put on and take off our shoes, as moving a finger would set us going.
Jeez.
He laid himself down by the side of our door and slept upon the trunks 2 nights. He is the favorite of the whole ship.
Oh my gosh.
So you were just talking about Job being the favorite.
He's a mensch.
And he literally was the favorite.
He's the best. What is it with Jobs out there?
Jobs.
Except for Job from Arrested Development.
Yeah.
It's an illusion, Michael.
She later wrote to Mary that no being in nature was so disagreeable as a lady at sea.
Jeez.
Despite the anti-feminism of her own statement, she believed that water was for men. And I chuckle because Aaron is the one that gets really sick and I don't.
That is funny.
Luckily, Job had the job of taking care of her.
Yeah.
The ship was filled with potash, ash residue used to make soap, and spermaceti oil
Oh, yes.
from sperm whales, which made the whole boat stink. So on top of the motion, it stank. The boat itself was filthy. It was a merchant vessel. It was not a passenger vessel. And Abigail couldn't stand it. And between bouts of illness, she cleaned it. She later told Mary, I soon exerted my authority with scrapers, mops, brushes, infusions of vinegar, etc. And in a few hours, you would have thought yourself in a different ship.
Oh my gosh.
So she got it in ship shape.
That's cool.
Despite how long the other crossings seemed to have taken, theirs took just about a month. And on July 18th, land was spotted. The winds were not at their back, though, so rather than spend another week on the boat heading slowly down the River Thames, they opted to disembark into the town of Deal. A small boat had ridden out to them and said, does anyone want to come into Deal?
Nice.
And they were like, yes, please. And apparently it was really, really rough water. And there was one point where she describes the boat was going to tip, so they all ran to the other side of the boat to make it not tip. And she was like, ah. Eventually they got there. They got off the boat. They went inside to a hotel, and they got dry clothes and a warm meal, and they were fine after that. So it was definitely a harrowing event.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun.
No. Let's see. In the morning, 2 carriages were ready to take them the 72 miles to London. Abigail definitely experienced some culture shock, although she wouldn't have called it that because I don't think that term existed at that point, upon arriving in England. She compared everything to how it was in Massachusetts. Oxen were smaller, cattle and sheep were larger, roads didn't have stones, the churches were old Gothic cathedrals, and Abigail observed, she said, they look more like jails for criminals than places designed for the worship of the deity. They have a most gloomy appearance and really made me shudder.
She's not wrong, dude.
She didn't like it.
Cathedrals are creepy.
I mean, but when you're inside, they're actually cool.
They're amazing, but
On the outside, they're a little scary.
we won't get into it, but there have been a lot of people that have talked about like why cathedrals were cathedrals, and it was a very psychological thing of, well, when you walk in, you feel overwhelmed, and the people that are at the pulpit are in control. It's psychological. You kind of like they needed these grand buildings to demonstrate their grandness.
Interesting.
Right?
I never heard that.
Yeah,
I saw the cathedral in Toledo, Spain, and it took, maybe we talked about this at one point, it took hundreds of years to build.
Yeah, the master architect that designed it or whatever.
Well, it was more, to me, it's just like the overwhelming, I don't know what word it is, but you walk in, it's so big, and you think about how centuries it took to build it, and you're just kind of overcome with this like sense of insignificantness.
Yeah, and I think that's a big psychological reason for them,
I don't think that the cathedrals in Deal, England were as big as the one in Toledo, Spain, which is the third largest cathedral in the world. But
I also imagine it would have been pretty wild to have spent 8 years, something like that, at war with this nation that was your like mother nation or whatever, and then now here you are with these enemies. So
well, we're going to get to that in a second.
Okay, cool.
But before we do, on the road to London, they came across a young man who'd attempted a robbery and had been captured, and he was being taken to his punishment. He was like in a little cage on a cart. His captors said, "You have but a short time. The court set next month, and then, my lad, you swing."
Whoa.
Abigail was appalled. I mean,
yeah.
I think about like even Monty Python. Like, I mean, it's just like they're going through the muck. There's no cobblestones, and they're like, "You're gonna swing."
I gotta swing.
Arriving that night at 8 p.m., they checked into Lowe's Hotel in Covent Garden. I knew I was going to mess that up when I wrote that. For the next few days, they were called upon for visits by people who had remained friends of America during the war. If you arrive in England, people will call upon you to meet with you and have tea or whatever.
Okay.
Let's just keep that in mind.
Okay.
They also went sightseeing. They saw the Tower of London, Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral, and Patience Wright's Wax Museum. Abigail was fooled, thinking a few of the figures were actually real people.
Wow.
Actually, Patient Wright also said she walked in with Nabby, right? Her daughter, who Abigail's 40 at this point, and Nabby's like 17.
Okay.
So she's half her age. And she goes, she basically did the whole, you must be sisters. But I don't know. Yep. I mean, I think Abigail, maybe despite her anxiety, looked pretty good for her age.
Hey, I'm sure she did. But I hate to say it to everybody out there, 99% of the time, we're just being nice when we say those things.
I do have, there's one family that I grew up with, and like the mom and the daughters.
No. Occasionally, there's a hot mom where you're like, whoa, hang on a sec. But it's usually when you go, "Are you guys sisters?" You're being nice.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. She definitely was like, "Are you a sister?" Anyway, all in all, Abigail approved of London. She wrote to Betsy and said, "I assure you, my dear sister, I am better pleased with this city than I expected." She was impressed by London's indoor plumbing.
I bet.
She even commented on how the dress of the people was more modest than that of Americans. She didn't want to leave London. In general, she quickly became more forgiving of the loyalists that had gone back to England during the war, and it seemed that neither side harbored any ill will now that the war was over.
It seems to be that tracks.
Yeah. I mean, I think the English are very like, okay, well, let's move on.
And I also think there is an element where that was like, because America kind of was a child of theirs, right? Is like we came from, right? Like there was an element where they were like, well, I guess we can't control these guys anymore. They're doing their own thing. So I guess let's just shake hands and call it a day, I think the individual people in London also were like, I'm never going there, or maybe I might, but I don't care. Like, well, I would say that more than anything, they were just going like, oh yeah, that was happening over there. Yeah, yep. we didn't care. We were just here living our lives
Cheerio.
Normally. It was all the royals and all the government that was doing it. We were just here, like most of us are in the United States when wars happen. So
yep.
Anyway.
Let's see. Okay. So at this point, it had been almost 5 years since she had seen John or her son, John Quincy. John Quincy arrived in London first. When he had left, he was 12, and now he was 17, and she hardly recognized him, she said, except for his eyes. I mean, yeah, just think about the difference between a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old.
Well, and also imagine not even just seeing him and looking different, but he probably not just sounded different in how he talked, but his accent. Having spent so much time in Russia, and then having spent so much time in Paris and so much time in the UK,
Amsterdam, and also,
Amsterdam, I think he probably was picking up weird inflections on things, and so he was probably talking in a way that she was like, "Oh, whoa, you even sound different."
Yeah,
you know, you
I'm
don't
sure
sound
he
American
was
anymore.
completely different. John arrived a week later, and while there's no account of his arrival from Abigail's side, Nabby arrived back at the hotel, and she called it strangeness in the room. Part of this was because John had come, and they were getting ready to leave in the morning, but like everything was kind of askew, and there was a hat, and she was like, "Oh, that's my father's hat." She says he'd gone upstairs to take a nap, and she knocked on the door, and he was like, "Oh, daughter," and whatever. I like to think they hadn't seen each other in 5 years. The hat flew off.
A matter of fact, that is one of the only other things from that Paul Giamatti series that I remember is when they first see each other after this
break.
There's a little bit of a hot and heavy moment.
I don't know. Abigail would surely, first of all, they wouldn't write each other about their own thing, and most of the stuff we're seeing is letters to each other. Maybe she probably wouldn't write her sisters about, "Oh yeah, I finally saw John,"
right?
Like, anyway, but I thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah, that's funny.
Now, the next day they headed to Paris and arrived on August 13th after a 200-mile journey. They took 2 carriages. One was purchased by John and the other was rented for Esther and Job. They all went, and they got to the Channel. They took a boat across, and then they finally got to France. Abigail expected a lot from France. It was a recent American ally. She'd been reading French stuff for her whole life. She spoke French, but she was disappointed.
Bummer.
First, she didn't really meet anybody when she arrived in France. The custom was, when you were new, you had to call on the person. So in England, people came to call on you, but in France, you had to go call on people. And she wasn't comfortable doing that. So unless she went out, she wasn't really going to meet very many people. So they kind of hung out in Paris. And then for a few days, they moved to the outskirts of Paris. Okay, I'm going to butcher this. To the Hotel Roule, but it's Rouault, or Rouault, but it's like Roule.
You got me. I would have to see it.
This is what I was like recording or going to YouTube to pronounce it. In Auteuil, Auteuil, I don't know. So a suburb.
Yep.
It was huge. The hotel. It was called hotel, but it was basically a house. It was 50 rooms about, except nobody could ever agree on how big it was. I think they were like, we'd never win in all the rooms.
That's funny.
It was also extremely beautiful, and it overlooked the River Seine, and it was surrounded by 5 acres of like manicured gardens. Cool. Beautiful. Abigail did love how much room she had in her private chambers. She had 2 rooms, one for writing and the other one for reading and sewing. She just had all the space, which kind of reminded her of when she was in her inoculation station at her Uncle Isaac Smith's mansion, and she had 2 rooms there.
Inoculation station.
Abigail was not impressed with the servants. She had 8 servants, and each of them did one very specialized task with no crossover. Where she came from, people were cross-trained. This created anxiety for her frugal mind because she was afraid they were not going to be able to afford all of this on John's salary. Apparently, renting the entire property costs less than 1/10 of John's annual salary. I'm going to get to some real dollars here in a second. They were also expected to have parties, which were called entertainments, because he was like a diplomat, basically.
Yeah.
These cost up to 60 guineas each. In reality, they were nowhere near going over their annual budget. They were well within John's salary, which had actually apparently been reduced from $11,000 to $9,000. But the $9,000 today is $275,000 in a currency calculator.
Makes sense.
And I did mention this earlier. Like, it was kind of hard for me to find a calculation thing, but I can guess that tracks with how much they would probably be getting paid.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were nowhere near. It was they
just
could
very
live
frugal.
this lavishly, and it just seemed like they couldn't in her mind.
They were a little stingy.
Yeah. Abigail's analysis of the French continued, and she found things to be inefficient and far inferior to Massachusetts. For example, their fancy residence had tile floors, so they couldn't be cleaned with water. Instead, they had to be waxed and polished, and she found that inefficient and amusing.
Mm-hmm.
They also lacked the fabulous indoor plumbing that London had. So she was like, well, wait a second. I was just in London and they had a privy in my room. They had to use chamber pots and she thought that was gross.
Yep, I would too.
Because I think she used outhouses. So like having a chamber pot was kind of yucky for her. Abigail also found the French to be rather vain. She said, quote, fashion is the deity everyone worships in this country.
It's so strange. I've never heard anybody talk about the French being vain before.
Or into fashion.
It's strange.
She further explained that everyone from the wealthiest aristocrat to the lowest servant had to submit to the rules of fashion. Her poor American servants had refused to get their hair done, and they were ridiculed by the French servants.
Jeez.
She said that Esther had several crying spells over it. Poor Esther. If there's one thing that Abigail thought France did better than London, it was the difference in certain laws and policies. Theft was rampant in London, with the execution as the punishment.
Jeez.
And in France, robberies and executions were pretty uncommon. There's also the surprising practice of legal prostitution. Abigail was astonished to learn that 52,000 prostitutes had registered with the authorities in Paris.
Wow.
She observed, though, that walking the streets of Paris, she wasn't propositioned by men, and she felt safer there than she did in London.
Interesting. It's like things were put into better boxes.
I mean, if prostitution's legal, they're not, I mean, it's pretty, I don't know what they wore to be like, I'm a prostitute, but...
We said we wouldn't get political, so we won't, and I'll just keep my mouth shut.
I mean, it's just interesting because when you legalize things that are illegal, you can regulate them better. That's the only thing that
I do tend to agree with you on that. So
on a lot of things, you can regulate things. Anyway, Abigail decided that she didn't like French women, though, despite not having met very many. One French woman that she did meet was, here comes a butchering of a name, Comtesse de Lingenville de Articrote, a.k.a.
Lingenville.
I know, it kind of reminded me like lingonberries.
Yeah.
Anyway, a.k.a. Madame Helvidius.
Helvidius, that's a good name too.
Madame Helvidius was a friend of Benjamin Franklin, and he actually wanted to marry her.
I was going to say air quotes friend.
I don't know. It didn't get into that in this part of this, but he wanted to marry her is what I understand.
And he was already married.
Was he?
Ben Franklin was married with a child and had many lovers in Paris.
Oh, okay.
Many.
Well, then whatever. So
Yeah.
one of them. Now, Madame Helvidius was very loud and she was really touchy-feely with Benjamin Franklin, which was like not cool for Abigail. She was like, she's all over him at the dinner table. She also had a poorly trained dog who would wet the floor, and Madame Helvidius would just like wipe it up with the skirts of her dress.
Ew.
Nabby agreed with her mother about French people and wrote to cousin Elizabeth Cranch, "The people are, I believe, the dirtiest creatures in the human race." I mean, she did wipe up dog pee.
No,
with her-
dude, I'm sorry. That's
rough.
vile.
It gets worse.
That is vile.
If you wish to gain a higher relish of your own country, I would advise you to visit Europe.
Basically, go anywhere else and it'll make you really see how bad the French are.
No, she was saying if you wish to feel better about America, come here because the people here are terrible.
I thought you were saying about Paris. She's like,
No.
if you think
She
Paris
was
is
saying-
great, no, go to these other places.
Yeah, she was saying, yeah. Okay. It does seem that Abigail came around to France, though, and its fashion. She adopted a fancy new hairstyle, and she started wearing a tight French dress known as a mantua. So I was looking up mantuas. I'll have a link to them on the website, but a mantua wasn't from this century necessarily. It was actually like an older dress, and it's basically the dresses that are extremely tight.
Gotcha.
And like they're flattering, but they are kind of made to be smaller than they should be on purpose.
Gotcha.
Anyway, but Abigail started wearing them. Now, despite both Abigail and Nabby initially disapproving of France, they began to come around, living in Europe for the next 5 years or so.
Whoa.
And that is where we will say au revoir today.
Oh, au revoir. You had to do it, didn't you?
I was like, how am I going to wrap this up? Au revoir.
I didn't realize that she was in Europe for that long.
Yeah, it's a bit.
That's crazy. I mean, I knew, man, I have I could on one hand list the things that I basically know about John Adams, but one of the few was that I knew he got sent to an assignment of some kind. I thought it was in Paris, and then it sounds like it was a combination. He was getting kind of replotted to a bunch of different spots. I did know that, he had been kind of sent away. I did not know that Abigail and Nabby went to go live there for 5 years.
And it's, I guess, 4 years. I think it's somewhere between 4 and 5 years, but
Sure.
yeah, about 5 years.
And then if you add in the travel time and everything,
Yes.
it's like, 6 years at that point or whatever. So
Yes.
that's crazy.
So that was a lot of years covered in Abigail's life, but
Fascinating.
the war is over.
The war is over.
And she's finally getting to travel.
The revolution is over. Now we just got to get into the War of 1812.
We've still got a few decades until that.
We got a couple. And then there's the 3 Years' War. And then...
They'll all be dead before the Civil War.
That is true. That is true. But they won't be dead, it seems like, before Queen Victoria takes the throne. Wasn't that 1839?
I think some of them may be dead.
Some of them might be dead. Anyway, still really neat. Oops, I just smacked my chair here with my foot.
Daniel, you're getting out of control over
I've just
there.
got to control myself. I got to calm down. Well, awesome episode. I was super curious to know what was going on during the whole revolution and stuff, and that was awesome, dude.
I didn't get too far into like the battles and the stuff.
She wasn't part of it.
I talked more about her.
Right, and I said this to you in the last episode. It's the reason I like it is because you can go and watch a History Channel documentary about the Revolutionary War tonight. Mm-hmm. And you can get a ton of information about the specifics of a battle and all this kind of stuff. And I like all of that as well. But what you generally don't find is a documentary all about
A day in the life.
Everything else that was going on during the Revolutionary War. Like, was it technically smuggling to bring in these goods from one nation to the other? Because technically it was still under British law, but we were forming new laws of our own. But was there technically a law yet about import goods? I bet there wasn't. So does that mean that? And you see what I'm saying? That's why this is an interesting idea.
If anybody does know if it like truly was kind of like smuggling, it sure seems like it to me. If they're kind of,
I think it's one of those legal gray areas where it's like, because they were at war and because there wasn't necessarily a law that would have been implemented by the U.S. at the time, it was probably neither. It was probably just like you were just bringing back goods and we didn't have a process for that yet. So
and I don't know, like eventually duties or things like that the United States would have imposed. I don't know. So it definitely a bit of a gray area. But you know what? I think that she had some lemons and she made lemonade.
Dude, more than lemonade. Sounds like she had got lemons and was like, how about we create this brand called Simple and we just make lemonade like everywhere. And like, just like when you go to get lemonade, there's just this thing called Simple and you just get Simple lemonade. Like, that's what it feels like to me.
She built an empire.
It wasn't a lemonade stand. It was like, no. Who's doing manufacturing?
She was employing like friends and
how can we make lemonade at scale with these lemons?
I mean, to be honest, you were saying it too. Like, it's pretty impressive that she like had the gumption to like even try and do these things. And like, a lot of times investments don't necessarily work out. And
totally.
In general, things, I mean, a part of it is like no risk, no reward. That's nothing venture, nothing gain.
Yep.
So anyway, I don't know. Definitely an interesting lady, and we're going to learn more next time.
I'm excited to dive deeper. Well, before we wrap up, like always, we'll give a quick little shout out to good old Metalwork by Miola. I always like to say, give a little word to my buddy Akiva. Again, everybody, if you're a longtime listener, you've probably heard this before, but I'll say it one more time at the very least, and probably every other episode for a while now. Go and check out metalworkbymiola.com for any of your custom metalworking needs. Most specifically going to be for things like chef's knives or really any type of bladesmithing. But it's a good friend of mine. His name is Akiva, a really, really talented bladesmith, and you'd be supporting a local 100% made by hand kind of service there. So again, go check out metalworkbymiola.com. Use the code biographers at checkout. You're going to get 10% off. That's probably it for today. Anything else, Aubrey?
No, I'm good.
Cool. I'm looking forward to the next episode while you go on vacation in Southern California. Have a nice little time. Be wicked jelly in my foot of snow outside. You're going to be basking in the warm rays of a California beach.
I'm just taking advantage of this time in my life.
Yeah, dude. Enjoy. And all of you enjoy. Hopefully you enjoy this podcast.
Woohoo! Tell your friends.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.